Hey everyone, this is Adam Ellenboss from Nightlight Astrology, and today we are going to look at your sun and rising sign horoscopes for the month of February. Joining me today is my friend and colleague Alex Amorosi. You guys know Alex. He comes on every month to help me break horoscopes down for you guys. So it'll be nice to have him back today in the new year here. Before we get into it, as always, don't forget to like and subscribe. Share your comments. Click the notification bell if you want to know when I'm going live. Or when new content has dropped, you can do that. You can find a transcript of any of my daily talks, including today's, on the website, nightlightastrology.com. I want to take you over to the website right now because there is a new page that we're premiering on the website, which is a monthly webinar series that I will be doing. These are talks that I'm doing now once a month that are geared more toward beginners or casual, casual consumers of astrology, as opposed to like serious or advanced students with like my masterclass series or my year-long training programs. So the first of these programs comes up if you go to nightlightastrology.com and you click on the events page. You'll see a live events. You'll also see it on the homepage. Scroll down and you'll find my first talk, which is coming up on Thursday, February 15th from 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern time, called The Outer Planets in Our Relationships. This is part one of a three-part series that I'm doing on the presence of Pluto, Neptune, and Uranus in the natal chart and in transit when it comes to our love relationships. So in this first part, we'll be looking at the symbolism of Pluto when it is contacting, say, the seventh house or Venus in your natal chart or by transit. We'll be talking about what Pluto does and how Pluto works when it is influencing romantic love and relationships. So if you're interested in that, you can go over to the website and sign up. And when you do, you'll get a link to the talk. If you can't make it live, you will also be sent a replay of the talk to download. And would love to see some of you guys there. So check that out. It's a new series that I'll be offering once a month, monthly webinars on different topics in astrology, geared toward anyone. So you could be a total beginner and be involved in this, or you could be a more advanced student and find something valuable from this series. So anyway, thanks for considering that. Check it out. Let's see here. Now, on that note, I'm really happy to bring Alex back for horoscopes this month. Hey, Alex.
We're back.
And action. How's 2024 been for you so far?
Actually, pretty good. It's been pretty good.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny too. It's good to be back. Like I had a very Ellen Boss Christmas, I called it, because we were recording all of those horoscopes for like three a week going. So it's nice to be back with you, and it feels like I don't know. I don't want to speak too soon, but I feel kind of open this year. I feel kind of fresh and some possibility, and got some cool things cooking for the year. So I'm excited. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say the first couple of weeks of January were totally bonkers because we had, 1,900 people support the Kickstarter, 1,900 plus, and we were distributing rewards to people. And so when you got 1,900 people that many of which need an reward fulfillment or whatever, our staff, we were super busy the first couple of weeks. So things have settled down a little bit now, and I've been able to like get back into writing my book again. I took a month off Instagram because I was with that much work. I was like, you're a distraction, Instagram. I love you, but you are a distraction for me right now. So I took a month off, and but things are slowing down, and I feel like Pluto moving into Aquarius has already, I've already been working with that, and it's not been, it feels more like my galaxy brain has been, like Pluto and Aquarius, my galaxy brain is turned on, and I've got like a million ideas.
Oh yeah, I was thinking the same thing with that trend. It actually felt like a big exhale when Pluto moved into Aquarius, and it felt like I had a million ideas of things I could do all at once, and really cool ideas. Like it almost, I would have mistaken it, with Pluto moving into an air sign for a Uranus transit, and I do have a Uranus transit going on at the same time, but it felt like here's about 15 possibilities you've never thought of doing before, and wouldn't they be cool?
Yeah.
So that's been a really interesting, and it also feels like when Pluto moving out of an Earth sign, it feels like that sort of structural angst has lessened a little bit, and it's more about like the realm of the mind now that we're in air,
Yeah, for sure. Well, on that note, speaking of that, let's take a look at the transits that we are going to be visiting given this month's astrology. We've decided to focus on, as Alex knows already, we've decided to focus on the Taurus Aquarius axis. And that is, let me put the chart up on the screen, that is because of the sheer amount of transits we have happening in Aquarius and Taurus. So you go to February 5th, and we're going to see Mercury conjoining Pluto in Aquarius. We then go to the 8th, and we have the Sun going into a square with Uranus from Aquarius to Taurus. You can see that right here. And then if we keep moving forward, on the 9th, we have a new moon in Aquarius. That new moon in Aquarius is square to Uranus and Taurus. We then get Mercury in Aquarius on the 10th, squaring Jupiter and Taurus, right? So it's like, then on the 14th, right before Valentine's Day, we get Mars conjoining Pluto in Aquarius.
Giddy up for Valentine's Day, people. It's wow.
On the 16th, we have Mercury in Aquarius squaring Uranus and Taurus, right?
Wow.
On the 17th, Venus will conjoin Pluto in Aquarius. On the 22nd, we'll get Venus and Mars conjoining in Aquarius.
Guys, I think they nuked the AI for stream
and then on
elements.
the 24th, we get Venus
I'm not
in
even
Aquarius
joking.
squaring Jupiter and Taurus.
I think they nuked it, guys.
And then on the 27th, we get Mars squaring Jupiter and Taurus from Aquarius. I know, it's just unbelievable. So that, from the beginning of the month through the 5th through the 27th, we have, let me just count them up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 aspects in Aquarius or Taurus or between Aquarius and Taurus. So
this is wild, Adam.
No, it's really busy.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
so
really
like
busy.
what we thought would be the best use of our time for everyone out there who's listening to this is to focus on the whole sign houses of Aquarius and Taurus and just talk broadly about that axis and what it means that it is being activated. The topics of those places are going to be popping for you, no matter what your whole sign, your rising sign is. We recommend listening to your rising sign. Of course, you could do so for your sun sign, but for example, if you're an Aries rising, that is going to be your 11th and 2nd houses. If you're a Taurus rising, it's going to be your 10th and 1st. So around the wheel we go, looking at the square between two whole sign houses. And we feel like, given the sheer amount of dynamics happening between these two houses, you should just be aware of how the topics of these two houses might be interrelated this month. Because that's start to finish, that's really the story of February. So that's what we're going to do.
This is a really interesting sequence going on here, Adam, because you begin it all with Pluto. And then Jupiter mediates it, but then you get like a rocket ship launch into somewhere new with Uranus from that. I mean, it's a really interesting sequence for all these planets.
And air and earth too, like understanding the archetypal combination of air and earth. They don't intuitively go together in our heads. Water and earth, or fire and air, or even fire and water. You can get the image of like a boiling pot of water or something. But when it comes to air and earth, I find that we are often we're lacking images in our mind that can easily put those two elements together. But do you know the one that I came up with, and then maybe you have some to share too, especially with Aquarius, the sort of galaxy brain of Aquarius, is that I imagine when we had the community herbal medicine garden built, we hired a landscaping company, and they came out and provided us with this beautiful blueprint. They spread it out across the whole table. And then they had a video we watched where there was like a 3-dimensional presentation of the blueprint. This is what we're going to build and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, wow, this is going to... And then there was the day that it actually began, where a crew of workers showed up and put shovel to earth. Used some machines and started actually shifting things around. So I keep thinking about ideal, the design, the Platonic archetypal realm in Aquarius, and the need to bring that into Earth and actually hit the soil with the idea.
I love that. It actually reminds me, my parents had an addition put on their house a few years ago, and when they saw that like my parents are in their, getting towards their 80s, and they saw the 3D presentation, they were like, "Whoa! Oh my God! It's really real." But then there was the whole pragmatic, approach to actually getting the addition on, which displaced them for a little while and stuff like that. So,
Yeah.
I think there's something with air and earth too, where they can get along because they're practical in a lot of ways. They're thinking in very practical terms. If they can respect each other's pacing, that earth will go slower because it's trying to embody and make solid what air has going on in its mind. And I think one of the interesting things here, a friend of mine who does counseling work talks about this a lot, is there's a fantasy reality we create, which even our cerebral realm of the mind is in a sense a sort of fantasy reality where we can control it. We can control how it looks. You can control the 3D diagram on the screen. But when you actually bring it into embodied reality, there are little interesting quirks that arise in the process of bringing something you've created cerebrally into a tangible embodied space. And I think that the patience this month of understanding that's sort of like, it's a little bit like when I was in music school. You can rehearse a piece and understand its nuances and know a symphony back and forth in the score, but every time you perform it live, there will be little quirks and little kinks and little things that happen that make it exciting, but that you weren't expecting. But it's all in the name of sort of bringing it down out of the mind or out of sort of cerebral space into a tangible, embodied, practical space. There's always a difference between those two spaces.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. There's the other thing is that in the realm of air, you think Libra, Aquarius, and sometimes the aversion that those two signs have, in particular signs of Saturn, to the imperfections of social experiences. Someone didn't say something quite right, or the tone of voice, or the social protocol was off, maybe for Libra, or I love humanity but I hate humans joke that we say about Aquarius. There's some kind of aversion to the muddiness of Earth. It's like, well, I'd rather just look at the blueprint. That can be a shadow of air, as much as Earth can be almost offended at the idea of having something structural and ideal impressed upon it. I think, for example, of the way that my wife, as a double Taurus, is offended by having too much of a structure placed on how we're going to spend a day. It's like, Taurus, she loves rhythm and routine and flow and ease and stuff like that. But if it becomes like Saturnian, if I'm like, okay, we're going to do this and this and this and this, she's like, oh, that doesn't feel easy. That doesn't feel. So there's something naturally resistant about Earth to being shaped into something ideal. It's like Earth wants to crumble and shift, and it needs some kind of. It is formal, like more so than water. But it doesn't, it's not a fan of conformity in the way that air is. By conformity, I don't mean, do you know what I mean when I say conformity?
Yeah. I think one interesting thing that happens with earth signs is I think they get a label sometimes of being controlling, but I don't think that they are in the sense of where there's all the earth signs, even Capricorn, have a sense of organicness to this. Capricorn maybe has a little bit more chaotic sense to it, but there's a sense of like the goddess is involved, we're in a receptive sign, we're just molding the clay as we go. But I think air signs can, and I don't mean this in a disparaging way at all, there's more of a sense of control in air signs because it's in the mind, and you can control what's in your mind. You can create the most beautiful, fantastic, like a plan. And by the way, Saturn, I have Saturn square my sun, so I love a good plan, and I love a good sense of like, this is what we're doing today. We're doing this, this, blah, blah, blah. And because you can create it perfectly there, but then messy humans come into your life, and there's a day, and I'm sure kids, there's a little bombs of chaos going on all the time. So there's a sense where air, there's a wonderful ideal that can be created in air and a wonderful blueprint, but the pragmatism is Earth's specialty and the ability to flow with the things that come up. When you're conducting a symphony, things come up. Someone may hit a wrong cue somewhere. Someone, the cello may not come in the right space, and you've got to adapt very quickly to kind of put it all back together. And that's really an Earth specialty in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Well, on that note, let's dive in. Let's
Yeah.
take a look at our Aries signature for the month, and I think we'll reverse the order. I usually lead off with Aries, and then we alternate. But let's do it in reverse. What do you think about Aries rising with the combination of Aquarius and Taurus in the 11th and 2nd?
I think this is really interesting for like, starting to get a sense in Aquarius, especially with Pluto's recent ingress here in your 11th house of am I being true to the social networks and the structures of my social life that that are truly supportive? Am I holding to too much of an ideal with them? Am I saying like, they have to be this way, they have to interact in this way, I need this type of person in this place, and that sort of idea. And that now squaring your second house, where there's like, okay, taking the ideas that you're getting from your networks, the ideas about your networks, the ideas of the people in your networks, and the people who are sort of in your social space, or the benefactors that are supporting your career. And are there tangible, real world, pragmatic results that are coming from that? Like, for instance, and again, I don't mean this in a disparaging way, but it might be something where it's like, you've been doing a networking group for a long time, but are you getting clients and money from the networking group? Or you've been doing one sort of strategy within a social network, but is it actually bringing you something where it uplifts your worth or it uplifts your sense of value? I think it's looking at the difference here between there's an idea I have of how this should be working, and then in the second house, is it actually producing me some money? Is it actually producing me some sense of worth? Is it actually producing me a sense of value? And I think Jupiter is such an ally for you in your second house in that regard, in assessing that.
Yeah. I drew 2 tarot cards to try to fill out the description a little bit. I drew the Knight of Swords and the Queen of Cups. And if you think about these two energies together, you're really looking at Aquarius with the Knight of Swords, and you're really looking at Jupiter in Taurus with the Queen of Cups. The interesting contrast is that in the second house, if we take the Queen of Cups as representative of the second house and the Taurus energy, we're seeing someone that's trying to establish peace, a degree of peaceful sovereignty. So you think of the Queen of Cups, you think about a matriarch. You think about a kind of like empress or queen figure with Jupiter in Taurus, whose primary concern is with ease and flow. It's a smooth operation. And the Queen of Cups is in control of something. She's gentle, she's sensitive, and she promotes prosperity, peace, abundance, but mostly through a kind of calm, fluid way of being. She's interested in that. Knight of Swords as Aquarius in the 11th is all about the conquest of new ideas and like airy, actionable. I mean, look at, he's just springing into action, and it's kind of dramatic. I mean, the Knight of Swords is much more about the kind of entrepreneurial ideas that might be taking off like wildfire right now in your mind or your life. Or it's about action and conquest and the desire to transform things, and there's a sense of mission and purpose and adventure and action. Well, either the Knight of Swords is doing those things on behalf of the Queen of Cups, who's trying to establish more peace and serenity, or they're clashing with one another. And so we have to ask the question, are these ideas and this excitement maybe around groups, people, career, ambitions, networks of people, colleagues, are these things that I'm getting excited about, are they helping me to create a resource pool of peace and prosperity? Or are they turning up the heat and actually threatening this? Sometimes we get excited about things and we think for a minute about the stress that will be involved with them. We might realize that, oh, actually, that's undermining the most important thing I want, which is peace. So as exciting as that opportunity is, if it's going to make me busier and more frenetic and crazy, then, I need to think twice about it. On the other hand, sometimes these actionable ideas come in and they're in service in the long run of helping us create more peace and prosperity. So they could work together or they could be at odds.
Yeah, I love that. I love the use of the tarot with that too. The images are so helpful.
I think So I've been bringing them in more and more lately because they give me new creative ways of looking at it and get me out of the familiar language that I always fall into. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. Oh, I know that.
It's just
I
so
know
hard
that,
when you're
yeah.
people out there. If you do astrology content, you know that when you are doing horoscopes, it's such a tricky dance because you're trying to describe things that can be applicable for thousands of people, and you're not working from the individual nature of a birth chart. So you need to find what's archetypally and thematically general enough, but you have to find ways of describing those general patterns in ways that are more nuanced, and that means you're constantly having to find new language, which is why having a conversation between Alex and I or using some cards is really helpful. But anyway, just a little behind the hoods, under the hood of the astrology program. All right, let's go on to Taurus in the first house. I'll start this one off. I'm a Taurus rising, so this one's kind of fun. There's a lot of emphasis right now on the career house for Tauruses. Making changes, creating space, new blueprints, new designs. I think it's interesting that as soon as Pluto entered my 10th house, I got a really interesting opportunity that came back for the first time in a long time. A long time ago, I helped with a gifting suite at the American Music Awards. Backstage, like the celebrities come and they just get handed a bunch of free stuff. It's kind of unbelievable that this happens, actually. But part of that suite is like, there's a massage chair and there's a palm reader and like that kind of thing.
Sure.
So right as Pluto entered, I got invited to come back and maybe do some more, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that for a while. And when all of these, we're rebuilding the website, we're designing the donation-based reading clinic. I'm redoing just a ton of things with our programs. So it's like that just galaxy brain blueprint is spread out on the table for Tauruses in their 10th house right now. There's a need for a transformation of the big picture ideas that are guiding or structuring your professional life or your public image or something like that. At the same time, you're facing the need for a tremendous recreation of identity and self and maybe health or vitality. I think it's interesting that in the meantime, a lot of Tauruses right now are going to be, the career changes are really coinciding with a kind of existential question. Who am I? What the heck am I doing? What kind of opening or breakthrough am I trying to create in terms of my very selfhood? And how's that connected to the reworking of things in my career? So those two, that's how I see the two connected right now.
Yeah, I could see along the lines of what you were saying, Adam, there's a sense of, Aquarius to me, and I've been thinking a lot about it this way, is Aquarius is systematic information. It's about putting the dots together in a sort of way that makes sense in a sort of bigger framework, like the galaxy brain. I love the way of describing that. And I'm wondering, with Pluto coming in here and then, Mercury hitting Pluto and Mars and Venus all hitting Pluto within a very short span of time, there's a sort of activation of like so much possibility hitting you or different ideas hitting you in ways you had not expected or very innovative that may feel overwhelming. And I think the check I would use is, this is so exciting, these are amazing ideas, these are amazing blueprints. Is it in line with the person I'm becoming? Is it in line with my goals for myself, my identity, my body, my health? Because, Taurus risings have had Uranus in the first house for a while now and really kind of jackhammering open a whole new sense of identity. And I think I would check the idealism of Aquarius against, does this fall in line with the values of who I am now? Is this something I want to do from a space of grounded, organic embodiment in my changing or new identity?
Right. I drew two cards again. The Eight of Wands and the Four of Swords, which is really interesting because it suggests swift, unimpeded progress and development, which is very Jupiter-Uranus in the first. Well, meanwhile, there's a kind of memorial happening in the 10th. It's a kind of contemplative rethinking or time and space to sit back and really reflect and even rest and meditate. I think of the Four of Swords as a very meditative card. It comes right after the Three of Swords, which is heartbreak, or relationships ending, or there's three swords through a heart in the Three of Swords. The Four is kind of like reflecting in the wake of loss. Now, I don't think that this is a tragic loss. It could just be that I mean, like at a funeral, you're reflecting upon the mortality and ending of things. And from that space, sort of mediating the start of something new. But there's this simultaneous image of swift, unimpeded progress, along with a real kind of reflective, contemplative space that includes reflection on mortality and endings. So that's really, it feels like Pluto in the 10th, for sure, with the Four of Swords and the Eight of Wands in the first. That there's a lot of this reflective period of remaking, rebuilding, thinking, looking at the ending of things. This will also come as you're, in another sense, moving ahead really rapidly.
I think that there is such a sometimes, you know, I think Pluto can bring about like something just has to end now. It has to be buried. It has to be, and that can be hard, especially when an identity's been built around it. But then there's such a sense of new life on the other side of that. I've experienced that with Pluto many times. There's a sense of the garden can grow again.
Yep.
In fresh soil. Yeah.
For sure. Well, let's hand it off to you to look at the Gemini rising horoscope, where we have Aquarius in the 9th and Taurus in the 12th.
Oh, you know, the yoga meditation teacher in me really loves this one because I can see a lot of, you know, the ideal Aquarian meta ideals in the 9th house. There's a whole new sense of like using spiritual technologies and understanding how they work, or understanding new belief systems or new technological systems around, you know, that not necessarily like electronic technology, but like systems that order your belief, or systems that help you understand or make sense of the world. But it's also squaring this, I don't know, need. I keep seeing that Jupiter as like the need for solitude and embodiment, like going on a yoga retreat, or even just a solo day retreat somewhere, like where the mind is so alive with all these new ways of seeing the world. Like maybe a new system, like astrology comes into your life, or tarot comes into your life, and it totally like blows your mind, and it totally blows you open to a whole new like set of possible ideas about how the universe and the cosmos are structured. But it's also looking at like, how do I bring that into a contemplative space, to sit with it, to like be in a meditative space with it, where I can bring it into a more of an individualized, embodied, stable place. Because I think it's really, this happens to me with astrology. It's like, this is the answer, man. This is what it is. And then there's a sense of, well, let me make this practical and embodied to me, and let me bring it inside of myself. And I think that Jupiter-Uranus to me really strikes me as sort of a quiet, meditative space where you take these ideas and really pull them into your more solid space within you.
It's really interesting. The cards that I pulled gave me an angle on these two that I never would have thought of, Alex. Let me show you. First of all, I pulled the Ace of Wands, which to me is totally fitting for the Pluto energy in the 12th. Maybe even the coming influence of Jupiter-Uranus conjoined, or excuse me, the Pluto energy in the 9th, and the coming conjunction of Jupiter and Uranus in the 12th. The Ace of Wands appears as a new inspiration, a new vision, a new conviction, a new value or belief that's speaking and requires action. So I like this as a time where something new is starting, and it might be the seeding of something new that comes from a change of mind, or something like that. But then these next two cards really got me thinking. So the next two cards are the Six of Cups and the Six of Swords. And notice that in both of them, we see the image of a child. In one, the child is with probably a mother or a parent being ferried across the water with 6 swords in the boat. This is typically read as like a bridge over troubled water, like a departure from a trauma, or moving on beyond or past something that was difficult, leaving it behind and seeking out a new beginning in it. You know, sort of like I almost think it's a refugee. You know, then you see the Six of Cups, which is really the exchanging of gifts and sweetness and affection between two children. And so I was looking at this and I thought, okay, put these all together now. Let's see if I can get them nicely displayed. Put these all together, and
why the slow pause? Why?
Okay. The 12th house is often associated with like exodus, like having to leave or being a stranger in a strange land, or even being in exile. And the ninth house is associated with our beliefs, but it's also associated with long journeys. When I put all this together, do you know what comes to my mind is the idea of leaving something behind that has been troublesome in the past for the sake of a more innocent or safe space.
Why? Why?
You know, it's just weird because you wouldn't necessarily think that the combination of the 12th and the 9th, like as you said, the first thing that comes to my
slow
mind
pause
is
again.
You're really shifting your belief systems, and looking at doubts and underlying fears and concerns. I could also see this as the seeking out of a totally new space because you need to get away from something that was just not working anymore, or that was unsafe or traumatic, and maybe that accompanies maybe that can be defined as in the 9th house as in a journey to get some kind of space or perspective, and in the 12th, a journey to be liberated from something that's been troubling or oppressive. Like there is the need for greater freedom from something in the past that was bogging you down, and maybe expanding your horizons, both mentally, emotionally, spiritually,
Got lit up.
but relationally. The 9th house speaks to going abroad. Now that could be metaphorical. Going abroad just might mean changing the
Too
scenery
slow.
somehow, a new beginning, pushing away troubles, escaping from something that's been traumatic. Those are images that came to my mind. I never would have thought about it like that.
Makes a lot of sense. And I think also when we're able to truly heal and move past something or integrate it, a sense of innocence does return. It's never quite like when we're children, but there's a sense of openness that begins to return. That I know as I've healed my own traumatic stuff, I was very close, and then you just feel like, oh, I can just be open to possibilities again and interest in, the magic of the universe again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, let's put the next one up. I think we came up with some good ideas for you Geminis out there. We're going to talk to our Cancers out in the audience now between the 8th and the 11th. What do you think about this one? Actually, is it my turn? I think it is my turn.
Go for it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so 8 and 11. First of all, the place, the 8th house, we've talked about this many times, so you guys have heard me say this before. When we say that it's the house of death, it's not quite accurate. It's the house of debt. And debt, is another way of talking about debt, is also about reciprocal exchanges, right? So, for example, I take out a loan, I pay it back, and in exchange for the loan, someone might make a little interest on the loan so that there's some reason for them giving out their money to someone else. So there's that kind of relationship, whether it's in the financial realm, the emotional realm, psychological realm, the give and take, exchange of power. I'll give you this if you give me that. I owe this to you, and I'm indebted to you, and you owe this to me. The agreement between a landlord and a renter, something like that. All of these kinds of things, whether it's credit cards, and there's clearly ways in which we are capitalizing on one another and taking advantage of one another and being used. And then there's also this entire realm of like soul contracts where the give and take is beautiful, and we heal each other and we grow each other up. And this is all, properly speaking, the realm of the 8th house. And it also has to do with, when we talk about death, what we're saying is that we all come into a body and we end up having to, we pay the piper. We have to, there's the coins you have to pay the ferryman, and I forget which cultural myth that is, but it's like, you have to pay the ferryman when you're dead and you're going across the river. Everyone, in order to come into a lifetime, the price is death. And we pay it because we're like, well, that's fair enough. This is a magical place to be alive, so I'm willing to die to do it. And that's the concept of the 8th house, is that kind of give and take. But when you put that against the 11th house, which has to do with our friendships, our partnerships, in a larger societal sense. These are the groups of people I belong to. These are the people that I share something in common with, have similar aspirations, that I collaborate and work with toward the realization of my dreams and aspirations and hopes. Now we're talking about the contracts that exist with such people and such groups and such communities. And what will we give them? What will they expect from us? So it's not just, eighth house might have to do with individual people, marriage, a partner. Oftentimes it's more interpersonal soul contracts. When it connects with the 11th, you're talking about social contracts. The larger social. So transformation of social contracts. That's what's up for review right now. I know it's very interesting to me that my wife Ashley, she's a Cancer rising. As this is coming through, she's returning from her maternity leave to start teaching her herbal training programs again, which she hasn't done since about the pandemic, right before the pandemic. So that means that there's like a social contract that's being renewed in her life between a community of people interested in herbalism and so forth, and this give and take. It's there, And so I find that really interesting. I find that just an extremely one simple expression. But the point is that you're looking at new social contracts, new groups of people, new opportunities socially and collectively for where you're going to be aligned and how you're going to be, who you'll try to advance your agendas and your ambitions with, and also what kinds of deeper soul contracts that will involve you. And I think that's the changing landscape for Cancer risings right now.
And I love that. I might be projecting a little from my own experience here because it's something I've been learning over the past 6 months or so. But I think in the 8th house, I find people with strong 8th house placements are often thinking a lot about emotional, energetic, or financial credit and debt. There's a lot of sense of like the give and take, and I owe someone or they owe. There's a lot of that feeling of owing going on in the 8th house. And I'm wondering if, Aquarius can have, again, in its mind, a sense of there are sort of ideals with that, right? There's right relationship. There's how we interact with each other. There's exchange of energy that is sort of right or correct. And I'm wondering also that when you go into the world of, again, messy humans, it's not always even the exchanges we have. Sometimes we're giving a little more, giving a little less. Sometimes people in our lives are requiring a little bit more of us, or maybe we're requiring a little bit more of them. And I think that if there's some flexibility and give and take this month in your social networks, and not knowing that there may not always be an exact evenness to every karmic contract, and that is actually part of the karmic contract in a social sense, is that sometimes we pay back what someone gave us a few years ago or in another lifetime or whatever. We give them our time, our energy, or whatever it is. That when you're putting it in the context of the 11th house, there that sense of it's okay if it's not all completely even. It's okay if it's not all ideal. Sometimes there's a greater system working behind the scenes that can be very healing if that Jupiter particularly is allowed to take hold a little more in the 11th house.
Right. I drew 2 cards to help elaborate. Hold them up. So we have the Judgment card and the King of Wands.
No. He is not still alive.
Because,
Whatever. Fuck
there's a number of
you.
different ways that I read this initially. One of them is that, there are things that are ready to come back from the dead and to express themselves. And I actually remember the 8th house as a place of contracts. One of the things that Pluto can do as a planet that's not just associated with death, but also revitalization. And, Pluto is very much an awakener of dormant or stagnant energy. It awakens it in the same way that a volcano will, sort of erupt and release this energy that has all the sleepy, metaphorical island folk going, oh my God, the thing is awake, the thing has come to life again. And obviously that can be really destructive, but it can also be, there's something about nature releasing its power from time to time, even though it is destructive, and I don't mean to at all make little of that. But it is creative. There's a creative force that's released in nature. And I see the Judgment card as really speaking to Pluto in the 8th house, awakening something within Cancerians' lives right now. And now the power of that awakening can shake things up and maybe even be a little destructive, but it's a kind of wake-up call. The bill is due, or the energy is ready to be released, or something that's been dormant is ready to be awakened. So I like that. And the King of Wands to me speaks to, can we handle this energy from a place of maturity? Can we know, I think of this raw release of creative energy. I think of the King of Wands as someone who can handle it, who can sit seated on their throne, and know how to lead or harness or utilize the energy without, without getting enamored or fixated on the power and mistaking themselves and their seat or their authority for the power itself.
Yeah.
There is also maybe questions about leadership, or who is it in a position of
What?
power
Like,
we're
it's so
seeking to align
dumb.
ourselves with right now? These are both very powerful cards that I think could also speak to, who or what we consider to be genuine sources of authority and how we're aligning ourselves with them. And that also has to do with the 8th and the 11th, because the 11th was really associated with powerful people that we may align ourselves with. To me, that along with the Judgment card suggests discernment. Like, don't align yourself with just anyone. Be sure that anyone or anything that has power and authority that you see as promising, as energizing, be careful, because the Judgment card suggests that you may pay a price later if you're trying to do something for the sake of expediency or opportunism or something like that.
It's always being careful what you bring back to life.
Yeah.
Pluto, when we're having a Pluto transit, I think that thank you for giving me this way of thinking about it, because I hadn't thought about it this way before, but I think Pluto will revitalize the things that should come back to life, and there are certain things that they just need to know. It's just done, and knowing that discernment is really important.
Yeah, for sure. Let's move on to Leo. We have Aquarius in the 7th and Taurus in the 10th.
Is it on my iPad?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, sorry. I'm like, I feel like I need a card deck too. So we
bring one next time.
Oh, yeah, well, I'll bring. I have a set that I actually really like. So here we go. Relationship and career. So I think that there are some powerful seismic shifts happening around relationship, the ideas about relationship, the way you construct relationship, the way you hold yourself within relationship in the 7th house, and that affects, the 10th house, I always say, is not just your career, but it's how you're seen in the world, the image that you have in the world, the way that you're bringing yourself out into the world, the higher ideals that you hold for that. I'm thinking of this as the resident Leo rising in terms of my life, of how I'm making some shifts and changes in the way I conceptualize my career and what I do that are very much based on shifts and changes that have happened within my relationships in the past year, especially my primary relationship with my partner. And so there's a way where ideas that are being generated, one of the things I'm finding with Michael is when you're with someone and they're in your space and close to you, you generate these really interesting ideas that you had to consider because they know you or get to know you in a very intimate way. And then there's like a thing like, oh yeah, I could try this with my career. I could try this, or I never thought that I would actually do something in this regard in my career that comes from an idea space that's generated in the synergy between two people. And that doesn't have to be romantic. That can be within friends or people who know you really well. But it's helping sort of transform the philosophies of how you see yourself in the world or how the world sees you. That's how I'd go with that, and that's heavily influenced by the way my own life.
Few cards to hold up. These I drew 3. You're going to see the Hanged Man. Let me just put these out. The Wheel of Fortune. Sorry. You're going to see the Page of Pentacles. And the Hanged Man. So when you put these, I'm going to kind of fan these out here. Put these together. And first of all, one of the interesting significations of the 7th house, because it was the place of the setting sun, was the completion of a cycle. So the daytime is over, right? That's the 7th house. And now we begin something new. I think it's interesting that Pluto entering the 7th, although it could very well affect our, for Leos, could very well impact relationships. And maybe there's some tie between relationships and career. It also speaks to the turning wheel of fortune and the end of a cycle and the beginning of a new cycle in a broader sense. When I see the Page of Pentacles and the Hanged Man, I think, yeah, we're at the precipice of an entirely new cycle. There's an opportunity here represented by the Page of Pentacles, which sometimes will literally show up as an enthusiastic person, sometimes a younger person, or someone with an idea. Could be ourselves as well, embodying the page. The page really strikes me as the Taurian energy of the 10th, Jupiter, Uranus, excitement about an opportunity or an endeavor in business and career, something with financial or material ramifications. But because we're also at the outset or the
Come on,
completion
man.
or
Like, what
the
the
resolution
fuck?
of some kind of greater cycle, the Hanged Man comes in as a juxtaposing card and says, you're in a liminal space. You have to wait and see. And there's a kind of purification that's going to happen as you sit between worlds for a minute. And the page might get frustrated by the Hanged Man. But if the page is patient, as the great virtue of the Hanged Man is a sort of contemplative patience and a sacrifice, a willingness to sacrifice and hold things in suspension, then your world can get turned upside down. A new cycle can begin that looks very, very different and is very exciting, but it requires moving through some kind of liminal space at the moment. And that might be indicated by the 7th house energies, which, again, are not just about relationships, but also about closure, the end of the cycle, the place of the setting sun.
Yeah, I love that. I think one thing I've discovered is, and it's so cliche, you hear it in spiritual circles all the time, but you really do have to let old things go to move on to something new. And I know I've been saying this over and over, but it's just been such a lesson for me because I never even thought you could write books. I'm like, I'm Sicilian. I hold on to grudges forever. You know, it's like, but at a certain point, it's like, this, you know, I've been feeling a lot like this cycle of healing is over and a new cycle needs to begin, but you have to just kind of let it all, the dust settle a little bit to understand where you are, you know. I love that hangman is a great message in that.
For sure, yeah. I mean, relational and career transformation, easy. I think there's these other nuances to the 10th and 7th, and they really do. The 7th often is about moving between two different worlds. You know, if you think about the transition from daytime to nighttime, it's a different kind of consciousness that's trying to establish itself. Well, with Virgo, we have the 6th and 9th houses implicated. I always think, you know, okay, first of all, the 6th house Aquarius energy is very much like the ideal of Olympic gold. You don't get to Olympic gold without the 6th house, which is the place of sacrifice, labor, hard work, chop wood, carry water, practice makes perfect. The 6th house is the house, the joy of Mars, god of perseverance, you know, god of overcoming obstacles and hardships.
Like, what? Come on, man.
Doesn't achieve all pro status without a million hours behind the scenes dribbling a basketball or whatever.
Like, it's so
with
dumb.
Aquarius, the 6th house, to
Like,
me,
come on.
all of the emphasis there, especially with Pluto entering for Virgo, suggests a new gold standard. And by that I mean an image, a blueprint, an idea, an archetype that we start to say that and nothing else, or that and I don't care what it takes to get there. I'm going to carry this, and it's going to be a great labor, a Herculean effort, a sacrifice, something that we're in service to, even that might be humanitarian, but there's something that we feel is an image as high as the gods and as far as humans can reach toward the gods, that requires our work, our perseverance, our fighting, our active labor. And that is also pinging off from the 9th house revolution of mind and spirit and intellect and philosophy. There's new teachers or teachings or new learning or new travel or new ways of expanding our mind or our horizons that is happening at the same time that we're being impressed by images that we are willing to now sacrifice for. Even
She's back, droid. I missed you.
Die for something. So it can be quite extreme. Now the other thing would be, I'm starting to get a bigger sense of what I'm enslaved
I was
by, what
really
I'm trapped by, where I need to seek
when
liberation in my understanding, my mind, my philosophy, my approach, my education, so that I can free myself from something that feels like a constant pushing of the boulder up the hill and it rolling back down. That could be the case as well.
Yeah. There can be a very Sisyphean feeling to the 6th house in some ways, but Pluto's a great ally with that. And, you know, as you're talking, Adam, I think we talked a little bit about this when we were recording some of the Kickstarter horoscopes, but there's an amazing movie I watched on Netflix over Christmas break called Naiad. It stars Annette Bening and Jodie Foster. It's a true story of a woman, Diane Naiad, who in 2013 set a record by swimming from Cuba to Key West across the water there. And she has this, and I actually watched interviews with the real Diane Naiad, a couple she did with Oprah and other places. she has this determined, I don't care what it takes or what I have to sacrifice at the cost of anything, I'm going to achieve this goal. And it requires, though, you know, as you see this, she has a team of 40 and a boat and all this training, and she fails 4 times before she
I'm
does it.
glad you're
There's
still
a sense
here
of
too.
this sort of, like
Come
we're saying,
on.
this sort of Herculean effort
Come
and
on, man.
sacrifice of time, energy, even sometimes relationships necessary to achieve a certain specific goal. And if there's ever a movie archetype that fits what we're describing here, it's this movie that I saw. It's like the amount of nuances that also go into a swim like that, and the currents and the winds and where you are and the weather and all the stuff that happens. It's pretty remarkable to see, but it really encapsulates that sort of sixth house dynamic towards a higher ideal, something I really am seeing in my mind and am willing to put in the blood, sweat, and tears to do.
Yeah. I drew a few cards to help clarify. Interestingly, all cards of the court cards and a major arcana, all very similar. So we've got the King of Cups. To me, this speaks to high emotional ideals. So I know that air and earth don't immediately bring to mind the presence of water, right? But in my experience, Aquarius is the sign that feels most like water, even though it's air. And that's because there's so much emotional conviction behind the ideas that we find most compelling in the sign of Aquarius. There's a lot of emotional conviction. In fact, if you ask someone, if you ask an Aquarius, someone with a lot of Aquarius energy, how do you feel? They'll start talking to you about ideas. You have to listen because the emotions are in the way that they express the ideas. The hardest thing is often in an astrology reading is to get an Aquarius to step out of the ideas and just into the emotions. Like separating the two can be really difficult. But there is a lot of emotion there. It's just that it flows, its medium is through ideas. The king is actually a lot like that. It's a rational, masculine figure, but it's in a water sign. So emotional convictions come to mind. But then we also have the Queen of Swords. Really, these are like very similar images in terms of the pairing of the rational,
pause.
masculine and the intuitive, rational feminine. Like you have the King of Cups is a very like rational and masculine but emotional figure, and then you have the Queen of Swords as a masculine or a feminine but extremely rational character. You put the two together, I think we're talking about the balance of ideas and convictions and our ability to be in an embodied relationship with them, which I think probably Taurus in the 9th house is speaking to.
I love that.
Yeah, and then there's one more card. The last one is the Empress, another figure of feminine rulership. This one very, very earthy and sensual. And I picked her in the middle. She is somehow mediating the relationship between the Queen of Swords and the King of Cups, the ruling principles of mind and emotion. And the Empress to me is a great, like an embodied middle space for the two. For example, she comes right after the sequence of Magician and High Priestess. Another marriage in the sequence of the major arcana of a very masculine sort of creative figure and a very feminine creative figure. So I think that we're also talking probably about, for Virgos, finding a way of being passionate about your ideas, but making sure that they're really deeply embodied.
Yeah, and noticing that the emotion of that is okay. I think something you're saying out of just about Aquarius in general is so important. Mike, I was actually talking with Michael about it before he left for work this morning, was that air signs can give the sense of being detached or aloof for that sense, but they're, especially Aquarius, because they connect information so much, they're deeply connected. And it can feel really cutting when like someone doesn't appreciate the idea, or they don't respond to the idea, or they sort of feel like, well, they're detached, they don't need my connection anyway. There's a very deep emotional hurt that can happen with an Aquarius under the surface that might not be apparent from the sign on its surface from its elements and modality.
Right. If you ask them why are they upset, they'll say, well, human beings ought not to behave in this such way.
Exactly.
So let's go into Libra next. We're not trying to dump on air signs today.
No.
But Libra next, which pairs Aquarius in the 5th with Taurus in the 8th, and you can lead this one, Alex.
So this is interesting. I think that this can be like a creative renaissance happening for Libras, and a personal creative renaissance, even though it might feel like, with Libras having Aquarius for the 5th house, it's like my personal creative renaissance must mean something to all. My personal creative renaissance must have a deeper idealistic meaning for the greater movement of the human species forward, that sort of sense. But I feel like there can be, with a 5th house, all these Aquarius transits in the 5th house, a sense of getting a more detached idea of what actually makes you happy, what really brings you personal fulfillment, what actually brings you a sense of pleasure, what actually fulfills you in a deep way, and how is that relating to, even though it's a personal sense, yes, the contracts you might have with other people, the way other people view you. Sometimes I think with Libras, and I often joke about this having a Libra moon, I call it the Libra tap dance, where there's a sense of, I want to make sure that what I'm doing is okay with others and benefits others with an Aquarius. And notice that, and it's a wonderful quality, but also notice that it's okay to be healthfully selfish. It's okay to be healthily embodied, and it's okay to notice those contracts that might feel out of balance, where it's like I'm giving within this soul contract a little too much, and it's okay for me to receive. That can be a tough lesson for people who have strong Libra in the chart, but a really immensely healing one. So I love this transit, even though it might feel uncomfortable. I don't know if it's necessarily challenging as more uncomfortable, but that's sort of a healing discomfort for Libras this month.
I like that. I drew a few cards, two. So we've got the Ace of Cups, which, among other things, is sometimes a symbol for pregnancy. You can't help but notice that 5th house is active for Libras. So some people out there may experience this literally in terms of like pregnancy or birth. But the Ace of Cups really speaks to the creative originality and the inspiration, the kind of renewal of creative currents in your life, signified by Pluto going into the 5th house of creativity and joy and happiness that is derived from being creative. The universe is creative, and we are made in the likeness of the universe. We are endowed with creative ability and creative volition. So this card really, to me, speaks to the need to generate something new, to create. I see that very powerfully here. The other card that comes up, really interesting, the Nine of Cups. Oops. Nine of Cups is a card that speaks to wealth and an accumulation of resources, an abundance, but also pride and complacency. I can't help but wonder if the Nine of Cups in relation to the 8th
Slow pause,
is
what?
about, first of all, 8th to 5th. Is there a patron? Is there someone who says, I have resources that I can give you to start a creative enterprise with, which would be very 8th, 5th house. On the other hand, if these energies exist within ourselves, could we be saying, well, I've got plenty and I don't need to do anything new. I don't need to take any creative risks. So there's a complacency that prevents us from generating something of ourselves. This might also be someone who feels comfortable in the benefits derived from various relationships. Well, husband or spouse is doing well. There's no need for me to do anything, right? But the soul won't be happy with the Ace of Cups if you don't generate something, even a hobby or an interest of your own. So I see these two as speaking to creative resources that are available, creative breakthroughs that are available that can lead to an increase of wealth or happiness, but also maybe some complacency in looking at the relationship between a creative impulse and what other people have, give, provide, deny, or what you feel comfortable with and the discomfort with taking risks and things like that.
Yeah, I love that. I think that, as much as, especially for strong Libra, you can do something that feels personally fulfilling just from your own soul. There's a lot of healing that happens for Libras, and I think that's a wonderful way of looking at it. Yeah.
Moving on to Scorpio, we have the Aquarius-Taurus axis across the 7th and 4th. And obviously the change is coming in around the roots. transformation, death and rebirth around home, family, ancestral karma, living environment, your house, your parents, doing that excavation of old things from your childhood or family past. So there's deep work being done around the house of home, family, and roots. It's happening as there are also some significant breakthroughs taking place around relationships. The opening of new horizons or possibilities are coming, as in the seventh house we talked about earlier, maybe because of the end of a cycle. The end or completion of a cycle, as well as the upheaval or transformation at the roots, is opening up a new era, a new time in life. The wheel of fortune again is turned, and the soil is being turned over in the fourth. Something is completing itself. A cycle is now done, and new opportunities and maybe some sense of relief or expansion is entering. Although still, the topics of home, family, and lover relationships as interconnected right now would be maybe the most basic and accessible.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I think sometimes when, like last night, I caught myself when the full moon was happening, my 12th house. Michael and I were talking, and I was starting to feel edgy, and I was like, I'm starting to turn into my dad here. I can see it, I can feel it, I know it, I'm aware of it, and I'm going to catch it, and I'm going to do this differently. And it's really good for my relationships because I see different patterns that come from my past. Not necessarily bad or good, but I could just see, like, this is not going to be helpful here, so let me try this in a different way, which is much more helpful. And I think that one of the things that Pluto does in the fourth house so well is, as you were saying, it turns the soil over so we can see some stuff, that some marionette strings that have been controlling us without us realizing it, and that drastically improves our relationships, even for just seeing it. Even when you're just aware of, like, oh shit, I'm going into a pattern here that I know is not going to be helpful, or is not going to bring about a result that I want, or is going to be mutually beneficial. When you just see it, it's like, oh, okay, I'm reenacting that, and then the string cuts, and then I'm able to move with more volition and freedom in different types of relationships.
Yeah, for sure. I drew 2 cards. The 2 cards I drew, I think, are pretty easily connected. First one is the Two of Cups, which suggests the formation of new relationships, or the deepening of existing bonds and relationships, or an exploration of relationships, both romantic and maybe familial, right? And there's the idea of harmony. Like, there's a sense of sacred contract and agreement. It's a beautiful card, especially for Jupiter, Uranus, and the 7th. However, it goes along with the 5 of Cups, which is, you'll notice 3 cups are spilled, 2 are still upright. This card often speaks to a kind of temporary setback or a losing of something. Well, not everything has been lost. So, I look at this and I go, okay, we're talking about maybe loss, death, rebirth in romantic relationships, but also we're talking about cycles of relationships, of loss and of transformation. The 5 of Cups to me speaks of maybe grieving, mourning, letting certain things go. Maybe that's around home and family. While at the same time, the 2 of Cups suggests new relationships are forming. Notice that the 2 of Cups mirrors the 2 cups that are still upright in the background of the 5 of Cups. So new relationships where old ones are ending comes to my mind, or some loss or letting go of the past. Well, new opportunities are also opening. And this is very straightforward to me.
It looks like also with the 2 of Cups, Adam, is the caduceus that's holding them together, the healing of it into a higher ideal, the lion, into something that's a little bit more ideal. And that's beautiful.
Wow.
Let's move forward to Sagittarius. I'm going to hand this one over to you. We have
Tababoya
Sagittarius presenting Aquarius in the 3rd.
Petaginosa.
This is interesting. So I think, for Sages, this is a turning of the soil, or as I would say, living on the coast, churning of the ocean in your 3rd house, where there's a sense of the environment that you've been surrounded by now not being quite as familiar in some way, that there's a shift in the way you think about your environment, the way you sort of order your environment, the way you make sense of your environment, that's just like completely changing in a very deep and sort of profound way. But that's also hitting a need for hopefulness in a situation that might feel at the surface like something that is not easy or not possible. But one of the things that Sages do, and again, as the resident Sag son, I can say this, is we can run well on hope, and sometimes that hope is really helpful. Where it's like, I am capable of things that are challenging. I am capable of meeting those challenges. I am capable of moving through them, and I am capable of persevering. And I think that there can be a sense like when we're in a totally new land, so to speak, in the third house, where we are the proverbial stranger in the strange land, that can feel really challenging. But it can also feel really life-giving, and new, fresh beginnings can come from that, and it can expand our horizons, and we can think about things in a totally different way that really alter and, in a profound way, alter our sense of self. And because your ascendant ruler is involved here, Jupiter is involved in Taurus, I think that this does become more personal for Sagittarius this month as well, having this ascendant ruler being part of this configuration across Taurus and Aquarius.
It's interesting. I drew a few cards. I drew 2 4s. The 4 of Cups and the 4 of Pentacles. You'll notice that in the 4 of Cups, the looks like a young man who's sitting there with his arms crossed, looking at what he has, but missing what's being offered. So a message about potential complacency getting in the way of receiving something new that could be entirely beneficial. The 4 of Pentacles has something nice to hold on to, a foundation or a structure or a starting point of wealth and power, but is also maybe clutching on too much. Both images to me speak of someone who may have to open their mind in order to evolve or go further. It's like 4 of Cups, don't miss what's being given to you just because you're kind of upset about what is, or you're so fixated on what you have and what you lack that you're missing new opportunities. 4 of Pentacles would be like, you have something nice worth holding on to. Don't hold so tightly that you become miserly or greedy or something like that. I always like when there's 2 numbered cards that split like that. I like to pull up a third to put between them. So here I put up the Emperor in between the 2. So you have, let me just spread them out a little bit more. So you have like this. Oops, it's hard to do it with the camera. All right, so when I look at this, I think it's interesting that the Emperor, when you put it like this, is looking out of his eye at the 4 of Cups kid, who's like emotionally dissatisfied and like maybe missing some opportunity coming out of the clouds. Sorry, it's so hard to do it mirroring in the camera. So he's like side-eyeing that guy. Anyway, when I think about Pluto entering the 3rd house, I very much think about the Emperor coming into the landscape of the environment and maybe trying to inspire change, but dealing with a degree of complacency or stuckness. So I think about those 3 together, and I think about like what ruling forces or powers or people or authorities or like what forces are coming into your life, into the culture and the environment of your mind, your body, the actual physical environment in an everyday way, and trying to shake you out of a place of complacency or stuckness to consider new things, which maybe requires a sacrifice or a letting go of your grip on what you have so you can entertain something new. But it's almost like you may have to call on a higher, wiser, more mature part of yourself in the Emperor to kind of look and go, let's not stay stuck in the same old place here. We have to mature our point of view, and we have to become, you've got this, you can do this. Don't stay stuck in disappointment or complacency or clinging to what you have and fear that you'll lose things. You have to open your mind.
Yeah, and it's safe to do that.
Yes.
There's new coming. There's new right available. Yeah, exactly.
Right. All right, let's go on to Capricorn. Did I get that right? Yeah, Capricorn. Okay, here we go. So we have Capricorn rising. Capricorn places the Aquarius Taurus energy across the 2nd and 5th. Here we have the connection between values, resources, money, and the 5th house, which is the place of creativity. So there's always a balance between, do I have food on the table? Do I have clothing? Are my bills paid? Do I have enough to secure my existence? Do I have help, aid, counsel? support to prop up my life. And then the other question, which sometimes we think of as frivolous or secondary, but is actually just as important, and that is, am I creatively satisfied? Am I happy? Am I joyful? So for Capricorns, I see a real conversation taking place between questions about finances, money, security, possessions, resources, and new ways of doing those things, or new ways of considering those things. But it's in this really important conversation with what looks to be the stirrings of breakthrough around creativity, joy, happiness, romance, pleasure. If the two aren't going hand, I mean, it's easy for Saturn ruled sign to sort of privilege the structure, the security, but the Taurus energy in the fifth is saying, not if you're not happy, not if you're not joyful.
Yeah, I was just thinking that, I think that when you have two Saturn ruled signs leading off the chart, there's a sense of the pragmatic and the stable and the tangible and the structured is the way to go. And yes, that will always buoy a sense of sort of safety, but there can be a sense, I think Pluto, what it might do here is it might reinvigorate a sense of, but is there some passion behind the way you find value in money and worth and value and all these ideas? Is there primal sort of sense of fulfillment? And I think that can look different sometimes for Saturn ruled signs. It might look a little bit more structured or tangible in the sense than it might look for other signs. But I think that Pluto squaring the fifth house here, and all these planets that are going to conjoin Pluto as they move through Aquarius, there's a sense of, am I passionate? Am I alive? Is the fire ignited? Am I speaking from a place of bringing life force through my body? That sort of space, or is it just kind of feel like, well, it's safe and secure and it's okay, so that's just okay on its merits? That sort of thing.
I drew two cards. Love what you just said there, Alex. These two cards may also enhance our perspective, the Lovers and the King of Pentacles. Now, the Lovers, I just read a very fascinating essay in a book called Meditations on the Tarot on the Lovers. It talked about the Lovers, and I really resonate with this explanation as the choice that we're always faced with between worlds. Now, don't take it to be too literally Christian, but there is a way in which every day we choose to inhabit a sacred world, or we choose to objectify the world and use it for selfish ends. And sometimes it changes hour by hour. We find ourselves falling into an objectification of the world and a forgetting of its sacredness, that it's all actually divine. It's all actually heaven, so to speak. So I think the Lovers and the King of Pentacles come together. For Capricorns, the King of Pentacles, of course, suggesting a traditional material degree of wealth, security, power. The Lovers is also about what world you want to live in. What's the sacred magical world, and what is the kind of like the bottom line world of hierarchies, power, wealth, privilege, you know what I mean? And so I think right now, it's like the creative world, the magical world, the sacred world, and the place of some degree of material security or control is coming into focus for Capricorns.
That's a good focus for Capricorns.
Yeah.
That's a really good one to shift around. Yeah.
It's very much like I think of it a little bit like the choice of Bilbo to stay in his warm hobbit hole, or to venture out into the world to take up an adventure that has moral consequence for a world that's bigger than just his hobbit.
Right. Exactly.
We have Aquarius here, which pairs Aquarius in the first and Taurus in the fourth. So for Aquarius rising or Aquarius sun signs, if you're listening to it, this is the house. These are the two houses being
Such
active.
a fucking scam.
It's interesting here. So Aquarius, this is obviously like a really big time for you with Pluto now moving into your first house, which basically is now there, except for a couple months this year. There's a sense here where I think this is a really interesting transit, because I think, especially paired with Taurus, we put Pluto and Aquarius and Taurus all together. It is really beautiful to generate and live in the world of sort of 3D constructed ideas. That there are ideals and ideas that come, and they can be monumental, and they can reshape the way you think about yourself, the way you see the world. But I think Pluto here brings a sense of, but is there an emotional charge? is there a sort of place that comes, the fire that comes from inside the body, inside your soul, that ignites those ideas and gets really tangible action in place on them. And I think the Taurus fourth house can be very helpful here, and especially a nice solid anchor like Jupiter here can be a nice solid anchor of like, you know, a little bit like Adam and I were saying at the beginning, there's a sense of like, I've seen the project done on the 3D construction on the computer, but now it's safe to sort of passionately bring that into the world, even if it's imperfect, even if it doesn't quite match the blueprint I've created for myself, even if I don't, is very in the first house, like if I don't match the perfect ideal, and none of us can uphold our ideals perfectly all the time. We're all imperfect. We're all a little hypocritical sometimes. If there can be some flexibility on that and wanting to do better and embodying it, there can be some real action that moves forward. That's kind of the moving of all those archetypes, I would say.
Nice. Yeah, I really like that. I did draw some cards, and the first two I drew together make a ton of sense. The Fool and the Death card. When you think about Pluto in the first house, for Aquarians, you definitely think about death and rebirth. The death of something old, an old way of seeing yourself, an old way of being in the world, and the Fool, which represents really the total openness and unknown and even the risk of being in a totally new place. So to me, these two together really speak to death and rebirth of selfhood. But then I brought in a third card, and the third card that came up was the Knight of Pentacles, which, like Jupiter and Uranus in the fourth house in an earth sign, suggests a methodical but very active, earthy rearrangement of things at the roots. So when you put these together, you get the Fool kind of back there hiding. These three, to me, speak to new endeavors, letting go of old things, the adventure of rebirth, with some emphasis of physical, tangible reworking of things at the roots around home, family, earth. The base of your existence materially needs to change. And there's a very embodied, there's a seeking of embodiment that these changes in the first house are looking for. Through the
I hate you, droid. I hate you.
Let's see those. All right, let's go on to our last sign of the day. Obviously, we end with Pisces, and here we are. So Pisces in the first. Now this places Aquarius in the 12th and Taurus in the 3rd. Now, to me, when I think of this, Alex, right away, I think about the unconscious material that is going to be intimately tied to the environment that we live in. So the 3rd house, 12th house connection is a little bit like, okay, let's imagine, I'm just making up something that's kind of creepy, but like, let's say you lived in a haunted house, and let's say they were benevolent ghosts, they were nice ones. You live in that house, and there's all sorts of quirky, weird things that are going on, and it would never even cross your mind to think, oh, maybe we have some mischievous, very kind-hearted ghosts that live in the house. It wouldn't cross your mind because you can't see it. It's not the first thing you would imagine or think about. It's not on your radar. And yet, all of these really interesting changes and fluctuations in the environment are caused from this thing you never thought of or couldn't see. As you become more aware of it, then all of a sudden you have a choice before you. Are we going to sage them out? Are we going to befriend them? Can we hold a conference and, talk about rules and expectations? There is a way in which unconscious material is working its way into a conscious understanding of how it has been affecting and how it will maybe continue to affect our environment, our mind, our body, our local space, unless we address it. So for Pisceans, I really see this as an opportunity for, there's changes happening in your environment, your everyday culture, your everyday life, your mind, your emotional body, the way you think and perceive. The fish tank that you live in is going through a kind of renaissance with Jupiter and Uranus. However, it's doing so in contact with this tremendous Plutonian power in the house of the unconscious. So we either seek to understand where the need for change is coming from within the unconscious, or at least seek to understand what part is unconscious, or we start to, maybe we start to actively notice the signs of the unconscious showing themselves in the changes in the environment, and we begin to journal or reflect. But I think it's about a mediation between the changes, fluctuations in the mind, environment, and the unconscious space.
Yeah, and I think that what you're saying is particularly important with Uranus involved, especially with the new moon later in the month. That there's Uranus can create the feeling that I have to be liberated and free right this second, right now. It has to happen right now. I have to change my environment. I just got to go. And what Pluto in the 12th house will give you is actually a great gift here. And these planets moving through and activating Pluto is like, where is that coming from? Where is that desire to be free coming from? And it can be a desire to be free, to change your environment that really liberates you, invigorates you, gives you new life, new perspective. But it can also be, quite frankly, one that fucks things up unintentionally, because that desire to be free is actually coming from an old pattern within you, or something that feels uncomfortable, or something that feels like, oh, I just, the attachment theory is so big right now, but it's like, I like that idea of the avoidant attachment. Like, once I get too close to something, well, I've got to be free, but it could be a really great relationship, and that desire is coming from something older that may be driving you from behind the scenes. But Pluto in the 12th house, man, is that an ally. Man, is that an ally, because it really pulls stuff up that you hadn't seen before right into the light of day. And again, once you see it, at least you know that there's another possibility there. So really checking this month, like that liberation desire against where's it coming from.
Yeah, two cards that I pulled that make a whole lot of sense to me. So the first one is the Ten of Pentacles, which really suggests like a beautiful and sort of complete environment. I mean, notice that there's not really one figure that is depicted here as much as a total environment. Grandpa's on the chair, the women, the dogs, there's a sense of being enclosed in an environment of beauty, stability, control, serenity. So Jupiter and Uranus in the third, probably trying to create something like the Ten of Pentacles in the environment. However, contending with that is the Seven of Cups, which really is a card that has to do with delusions and illusions, fantasies, daydreams, imagination. The 12th house is going to tell us about, these two pictures are in relation to one another. What about the material wealth or abundance of our environment has been rooted in delusions or illusions or unconscious material? On the other hand, is our fantasy or our image or our imagination changing with respect to what the environment can look like? Are we becoming more artistic, or are we wildly reimagining the environment? And also, like, where are we being led astray? What is the unconscious fantasy realm of this, like, stable-looking earthly environment? And it may be destabilized a little bit by virtue of getting in touch with what is unconscious within that space.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting, too, because I never underestimate the capacity of the craving mind to create an illusion that this thing is going to be the thing that liberates me forevermore. Because the idea of attachment in classical yoga, and I think that Pluto there just gives you such an ability to be like, yeah, let me check that. Let me check that. Like, where did this impulse arise from, and why is it arising? And can I be with it?
Yeah. Well, on that note, we have made it through all 12 whole sign horoscopes for the month of February. I want to tell you guys where you can learn more about Alex. If you like Alex's work, if you enjoy his style of delivery, I highly recommend checking out his work on his website, alexamarosi.com, where you can book a reading with him or a healing session. Alex is an energy healer as well, as a yoga teacher, as well as an astrologer and Renaissance man. And then on Instagram, Alex Amarosi Healing. You can find him there with regular astrological content on his website. I highly recommend signing up for his newsletter, where he does full moon and new moon newsletters and things like that. So really good stuff there. Alex, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate you. And for all of you who participated with the Kickstarter, you'll notice that if you got one of those horoscope readings for the year ahead, Alex was my co-pilot for that. So we hope that you enjoyed those. We got a lot of good feedback about them, that people out there who listened to it really enjoyed it, and we're appreciative that you were there too, Alex.
Awesome. So glad to hear that. Thanks, Adam.
Yeah, you bet. Well, that's it for now. We'll see you guys again next month. Hope you guys are having a great day, and we'll talk again soon. Bye, everyone.
Homo sapiens line descends from a line that goes back about 6 million years, not much further than that, if we accept conventional evolutionary theory. So 6 million years ago, Antarctica is supposed to have been as cold and as frozen as it is today. And there's undoubtedly a time, they found fossils on Antarctica, there's undoubtedly a time when Antarctica was lush and green. The question is, was it lush and green during the lifetime of the human species?
Yes.
Graham Hancock's theories about an ancient civilization in Antarctica are quite intriguing, although they veer significantly from mainstream scientific views. He speculates that a part of this lost advanced civilization was located in what's now the icy expanse of Antarctica. This is a striking thought considering Antarctica's current freezing conditions. He links this to the hypothesis of Earth crust displacement.
The entire outer crust of the Earth, like the skin of an orange, might shift, leaving the core of the Earth in place.
This theory suggests that Antarctica wasn't always at the South Pole, but might have been in a more temperate region, allowing a civilization to thrive. However, it's crucial to note that this idea of Earth crust displacement isn't supported by the current scientific understanding of plate tectonics, which doesn't allow for such rapid and dramatic shifts of the Earth's crust. Hancock also delves into mythology, drawing connections between various global myths, legends, and religious texts. He interprets these as allegorical references to this lost civilization, particularly focusing on stories of great floods or cataclysms. He proposes that such a cataclysm, maybe a flood or a comet impact, led to the downfall of this advanced civilization.
To me, the obvious answer is we are dealing with the fingerprints of a lost civilization that mapped the world and that left evidence of that mapping.
According to his theory, survivors of this catastrophe might have traveled the world, spreading their advanced knowledge, significantly influencing the development of later civilizations like the Egyptians and Sumerians. One of the more fascinating aspects of his theory is how he points out the similarities in architectural structures and astronomical alignments at various ancient sites. He sees these as potential evidence of a shared origin of knowledge, suggesting that this knowledge could have been passed down from the earlier civilization. Hancock believes that this civilization's legacy includes not just advanced architectural techniques and astronomical observations, but potentially other lost technologies and wisdom.
The date that Göbekli Tepe in Turkey is built 11,600 years ago. That, weirdly, is the date that Plato's Timaeus and Critias gives for the submergence of Atlantis.
While his ideas certainly capture the imagination, it's important to remember that they are viewed with skepticism by the scientific community. Antarctica during the Eocene epoch was a completely different world from what we know today. It was actually positioned over the South Pole, just like it is now. But the climate back then was way warmer, allowing for a whole different kind of environment. This was a time when the continents were still shifting around after the breakup of the supercontinent Pangaea. So Antarctica, which was part of what we call Gondwana, was slowly moving to where it sits now, all isolated at the bottom of the world. This shifting around of continents, like Australia and South America moving away, played a big role in changing ocean currents and the climate. One of the most striking things about Antarctica back then was that it didn't have the massive ice sheet it has today. This absence of ice was mainly because of the much warmer global temperatures at the time. This had a big knock-on effect on the planet's climate, as the reflective ice that sends solar radiation
Today I'm going to talk about some traces of perhaps
We're almost at the edge of history when we go to 11,600 years ago. That's the date that Göbekli Tepe in Turkey is built. That, weirdly, is the date that Plato's Timaeus and Critias gives for the submergence of Atlantis. Archaeologists roll their eyes at any mention of Atlantis.
Flat Earth for archaeologists.
Yeah, it's flat.
Yeah. I want to talk about Antarctica.
I was very interested in Antarctica. There's undoubtedly a time when Antarctica was lush and green. The question is, was it lush and green during the lifetime of the human species?
Yes.
He did know that other pyramids had their entrance in the north face, and that is the entrance through which you will have gone when you entered the Great Pyramid. It's called Mamun's Hole. I'm doing a debate with a leading archaeologist on the Joe Rogan experience. It's a very good thing that this is happening. The mainstream has normally said, "Now we don't want to talk to you guys, you're Looney Tunes, we're not going to give you a platform." But in this case, it is happening. I have things to say that I'm going to preserve my ammunition for. So on psychedelics, particularly on ayahuasca, I have felt the presence of the entity that I call Mother Ayahuasca. She took the form of an enormous serpent who wrapped herself around my body. I felt enormously comforted. And again, I got a message that I've had many times, is that you won't be good at giving love to others if you don't love yourself.
What's up, everybody, and welcome to Flagrant. And today we're incredibly excited because we're sitting down with the Godfather, okay? The Godfather of my YouTube rabbit holes for the last maybe 5 years, 6 years, years beyond that. We have Grant Hancock in the building.
Thank you for having me on the show.
No, thank you. I actually went to see the pyramids because of you.
I'm very glad to hear that.
It was a mind-bending experience.
And when was that?
This is, God, when exactly was this? 4 years ago? Pandemic kind of makes things
It was like 3.
a little murky, maybe 3, but it was pre-pandemic.
The Giza Plateau and those 3 massive pyramids and the satellite pyramids, an amazing place. And the Great Pyramid itself is totally, utterly unique, extraordinary, and special. I have a long relationship with the Great Pyramid.
I saw this unbelievable story of you going to the top. I got like a quarter of the way up by myself, and I was there with my wife, and I was like, I'm not trying to get arrested and have her just be alone in Egypt. And so I put it out and I went back down.
Probably a wise decision, because you could have spent some year or 2 in jail.
Wow. Really?
Oh yeah. Wow.
Did you get locked up when you went up top?
No, the illegal climbs that we did, the first illegal climb involved 4 o'clock in the morning and a lot of bribery. And
how much was it back in the day to get to the top?
This was like 1996. It might even have been earlier. It might have been 1994. And we had a local guy who made contact with all the guards around the pyramid. We paid him money. I forget the exact amount. He said he'd paid them off. But then when we got to the base of the pyramid, we had to walk all the way around it, which is a considerable distance, 750 feet along each side. We had to walk all the way around it, and then we had to add more money to each of the guards at the 4 corners. And then we went up, and my advice to anybody who's climbing the Great Pyramid, which is pretty much impossible these days, either legally or illegally, is go up the southwest corner. Because the southwest corner is pretty intact. It's pretty much a straight line. You can follow it all the way to the...
What is the entrance on?
North side.
That's north.
Yeah.
So south.
The opposite
west.
side, and the southwest, yeah. Which is the opposite side to the Great Sphinx. And
then nobody's looking at you.
Well, it's good for that.
They're all facing east
but then,
to pray,
but
so
then
you got
after
the whole
we were a few courses up, and another guard turned up with a shotgun. I don't think it would have reached us from that distance, but there were threats, and we had to promise to pay him more money.
So he points the shotgun.
Yeah,
He's threatening you.
Yeah,
you guys go, we'll pay you, and he's like, okay, now you can.
Basically, we did a deal that we'd pay him when we came down. And
did you?
Yeah, we did. Yeah, okay. yeah. It's good to keep your promises. And then we climbed.
Do you remember how much you paid?
I actually don't. But back in the day, I guess it was probably 1994. It would have seemed a lot to me at that time, but it also seemed worth it. It was a fantastic adventure, starting in the dark, or just the beginning of dawn light, and climbing up to the top, taking shelter at various points behind bits as other guards appeared, finally getting to the top. And then the light coming up and just this majestic view.
So sunrise.
And sunrise on top of the Great Pyramid, and the second pyramid, to your south. It's just an amazing thing to see, and it's an amazing experience. I would regard it as one of the peak experiences of my life. I did have one other illegal climb, which was just fortunate. It was following the holiday of Ramadan. They have a thing called the Eid, which is a celebration, and I would guess there were 30,000 Cairenes on the Giza Plateau having picnics, and they just decided they were going to climb the Great Pyramid. Not all 30,000, but several hundred of them. and we just joined them, me and Santa, and we climbed with them, and that actually is one of the moments when I realized how difficult the Great Pyramid must have been to build, because the biggest danger climbing up there with several hundred people on the pyramid was other people coming up and down.
So imagine managing that with all the blocks.
With all the blocks and supposedly a huge workforce and ramps or whatever the Egyptologists imagined was done, and I don't believe anybody knows how it was done.
Yeah.
For me, that was the biggest risk, was people bumping into you, going around you as you're climbing up. But again, we got to the top, and then I had 3 legal climbs in those days when those were allowed, doing various filming projects back in.
When do you see your last name inscribed in the block?
I think
This is an incredible story.
Yes, it is. I think it was on the 2nd or 3rd climb. I'm not absolutely sure. I think it may have been one of the legal type climbs because it was daylight and we were relaxed, as we were not when there were hundreds of other people up there with us. So I think it may have been one of the legal climbs. And there I did see, and it's on the south side of the Great Pyramid, the southeast side, overlooking the boat museum, which used to be there. And there was the name initial P and Hancock. And at that time, there was a date beside it, and that date, if I recall correctly, was the 5th of April, 1916. Oddly enough,
1916.
Yeah. Now my granddad was a chaplain of the British forces in Egypt in the First World War, so I had to consider the possibility that it could be him. He was called Philip Hancock.
Oh wow.
But I couldn't absolutely guarantee that, and I was able to confirm it by finding my grandfather's diaries. Which were little diaries about that high, tiny little writing in them. And on that date, there was a single line which said, "Climb Great Pyramid today."
Wow.
And then I found...
And it was dated 1916?
Yeah. And then I found his biography, which was passed down to me by my dad. And he also talks about his climb of the Great Pyramid in that, although in very spare terms, doesn't say that much about it.
I mean, I know it's not that much that he put in there, but did he say there was any security? Was
At
this
that time, no.
free range? Sand is covering the bottom
totally
of it?
free range. And I think the sand was definitely cleared away at that time. But anybody could climb the Great Pyramid. And there was, in fact, the guy who organized our first illegal climb, and I think I can say this safely because he's passed on to the next world, was a guy known locally as Champion. And he was called Champion because he was the champion runner up the Great Pyramid. He could run all the way to the top of the Great Pyramid. There were times people did that, and it was totally legal, and nobody objected to it at all. And that went on, I think, certainly through the sort of 70s and 80s. But by the time my wife Santa and I climbed 1994 for the first time, I'm pretty sure it was 94. It had become illegal, and now it's totally illegal. It's completely banned.
Yeah.
And I doubt even if a film crew would get permission to climb the Great Pyramid now.
Even like that.
Yeah. They're very careful about it. And one of the reasons why they're careful about it is that every year at least one person dies trying to climb the Great Pyramid. People still try to climb it illegally. And as you can imagine from the bit of the climb you did, you're looking at a 52-degree slope.
Yeah.
So once you get up 100, 150 feet above the ground, if you lose it and fall,
It's over.
you're going to go all the way to the bottom.
Yeah.
And it's over, yeah.
In the beginning, you have a lot of confidence. The first few tiers of rocks seem pretty easy.
They're not too bad.
But I can imagine you're halfway up and you start looking down, and it is over if you slip.
Totally over. And also, the course sizes vary. Some of them are really no more than sort of hip high. Some of the courses are chest high, so you've got to...
Courses are the blocks.
Yeah, I mean, it's laid out in layers. So, it looks like a step pyramid now. It wasn't before.
Yeah.
In ancient times, it was covered with facing stones.
And you can see some of the facing stones.
Some of the facing stones are still there down at the bottom of the Great Pyramid. They give you a sense of how beautiful they were and how magnificently well it was made. But the theory is, there's no absolute proof of this, that they came off during an earthquake in, I believe, 1301. And at that time, it's likely that that's when the Great Pyramid lost its summit. Great Pyramid stands at the moment about 450, maybe 455 feet tall, but its original height was 481 feet tall. And you can calculate that from just pursuing the slope of the sides up to the
30 feet came off?
yeah, yeah. So it's there's a flat platform, or rather even a stepped platform on top of the Great Pyramid with one level and then one level, another level. But the calculation is very simple. You just pursue those side lengths up to where they would meet, and according to that calculation, the Great Pyramid was originally 481 feet tall. Wow. So it lost about 30 feet. The question is, was it in fact ever completed? We don't know that for sure.
Right.
But the general view is that earthquake brought part of the top of the Great Pyramid tumbling down as well and knocked off the facing stones. And then, of course, it was used as a quarry.
That's
by local people.
what I've heard. Yeah.
You know, because it's very, very, very useful to have all this nice cut stone lying around, and a lot of those facing stones were taken away.
Okay, so after inspiring probably tens of thousands of people to go to the pyramids like myself, you managed to get banned from Egypt?
Yes.
Is it a real full-time ban?
This is not clear to me. We
gotta sneak in, Graham.
in my
we gotta do one more time.
There's a champion junior that we can bribe.
Dude, we need a carved G Hancock right next to P.
I think this would be good. It's very difficult to do that with a film crew, however.
That's a very good
And this is when it happened. Is that my Netflix series Ancient Apocalypse? We wanted to film an episode in Egypt, which you would have thought the Egyptian authorities would welcome, but when they asked who is presenting the show, and we said that Graham Hancock is presenting the show, they said absolutely no way, and they would not grant filming permission.
Let me tell you something. The Four Seasons in Cairo wants you to do an episode about the pyramids. I promise you.
Yeah, it would bring a lot of interest and a lot of people, but there's a rigid, fixed view amongst Egyptologists about the prehistory and the history of ancient Egypt.
So
and what the Great
questioning
Questioning that gets you banned.
Yes.
That's the first line of defense against a critic or an alternative point of view.
Yes.
Is simply to deny them access to the site. And I've felt since that happened that I've had my left arm cut off.
Yeah.
Because Egypt has been very central and very important to my work.
Yeah.
I hope eventually I will get back in. Could I go as a tourist? Maybe.
Right.
Maybe.
Announcement. I'm coming to the motherland. Play the bagpipes, Miles. That's right. The Life Tour is coming to Glasgow. Okay? Scotland, we're showing up. We're also coming to Dublin. Ireland, we're showing up. And you know what? We are not going to leave the north of England out. Manchester, we are pulling up. Is it Man City or Man United? We're going to see who's in the crowd. And whoever shows up more, that's who I'm rooting for the rest of my existence. So make sure you make the right decision, red or blue, because that's who I'm rocking with afterwards. Okay, those tickets are up for pre-sale right now. Code is Andrew. Get them fast. TheAndrewSchultz.com. Can't wait to see you all. Also, thank you so much, everybody who sold out the Royal Albert Hall show in London. We did that in a few hours. That was unbelievable. Thank you so much. Cannot wait to do the show in that remarkable venue. TheAndrewSchultz.com for all the tickets. Go get them immediately before they're gone. Can't wait to see you all. Peace.
Did the legal climbs, were they aware you had did the 2 illegal climbs previously?
Yeah.
Oh, and they still gave you permission?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
wow.
At that time, everything was much less sensitive. Everything was much less sensitive until 2015, when I had the beginnings of a public debate with who is regarded as the leading Egyptian Egyptologist, Zahi Hawass. And unfortunately, in that debate, Zahi, it's actually on YouTube, bits of it, because there was a member of the audience present. Zahi massively lost his temper and stormed out. And then...
So you won.
Then I don't know, but the debate didn't happen. Then I gave a talk. He sat sulking outside. Then he came back, gave his talk. Then the audience asked questions. And again, bits of this were filmed. And one of the audience asked him if he knew about a site called Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, which is probably the most important archaeological site in the world at the moment. And Zahi said that he didn't know anything about it at all, and that was on camera. So unfortunately, the man is actually enormously knowledgeable about ancient Egypt, but unfortunately he came across looking not very good. And ever since then, my relationship with him, which had been okay until 2015, has been extremely negative. And when the Egyptian government are approached for filming permission, which these days is done through the Tourism and Antiquities Permission, when they're approached for filming permission, Zahi's the guy they go to and say, is it okay for these people to come in and film? So I'm
Gotcha. So if you have beef with him, then it's not going to happen.
It's difficult.
And I understand the defensiveness, because when you wrap your cultural identity around something or creating something as majestic as the pyramids, feeling as if that's like being ripped away from you can really make you feel as if your identity is being taken.
Yeah, and to be clear, I would never wish to divorce the Great Pyramids from the ancient Egyptians. There are a lot of wrong ideas about what I think about this.
Please clarify, because I'm
okay.
lazy.
The clarification is this. It's complicated, all right? But inside the Great Pyramid, there are 4 very narrow shafts which point up at the sky. 2 of them point north and south from the so-called King's Chamber. I say so-called because no burial was ever found in it.
Yeah.
There was a sarcophagus found in it. It's still there, but they had to build the chamber around it. They couldn't bring it up in a funeral ceremony. It's too big to get through the corridor. So 2 shafts point north and south, and they do actually exit on the outside of the body of the pyramid. And back in the 19th century, explorers climbed up there. There they go. You're looking at the King's Chamber South, King's Chamber North, and both of those, you could roll cannonballs down them from the outside, and they would turn up in the King's Chamber. But the shafts of the Queen's Chamber are more complicated. Until, I believe it was 1872, nobody knew they were there. The inner wall of the Queen's Chamber was completely smooth, but there was actually he was a Freemason called John Wayman Dixon, who had explored the King's Chamber, and he figured, look, there's shafts in the King's Chamber, maybe there's shafts in the Queen's Chamber. And he went around knocking on the walls, and he found 2 hollow points, and he broke those through. You could do that in 1872. And lo and behold, they opened up into these 2 shafts, which go horizontally at first and then point up at the sky. They do not exit on the outside of the pyramid. They're very, very mysterious. The thing is that the angle of those shafts points to significant stars, 4 significant stars, in the period in which Egyptologists believe that the Great Pyramid was built. Archaeoastronomy, which is a universal language, one of them is the lowest of the 3 stars of Orion's belt. And the constellation of Orion was identified with the god Osiris. He was seen as the celestial image of the god Osiris. So having a shaft pointing at the belt of Orion or Osiris makes perfect sense. And others point at 2 of the 2 northern shafts point at 2 of the circumpolar stars. I forget exactly which ones now. And again, they point at them in the era when the pyramids were built, because the positions of stars in the sky change very slowly down the ages. So from an astronomical point of view, it would be absurd to disconnect the Great Pyramid entirely from the ancient Egyptians. But there's a problem. And that problem is the ground pattern of the 3 Great Pyramids and their relationship to, it's not an accident that Orion's belt has 3 stars, and that the Great Pyramids are 3, and that they are positioned on the ground. Anybody can see it in a pattern that looks very similar to Orion's belt. It's like a painter has got his easel in front of him and his canvas, and he's looking up at the sky, and he's painting on the canvas the 3 stars of Orion's belt, and then he lowers that canvas down to his feet, and that's what you have on the ground at Gyges.
It's that perfect.
It's that perfect, but it's only perfect 12,500 years ago, roughly 12,000. Let's say a round figure, 12,000 years ago.
Yeah.
These changes in the sky are actually caused by a motion of the Earth itself. It's a very slow motion. It's a cycle. It takes 25,920 years to complete. The pattern of the stars on the ground and the stars in the sky and the pyramids on the ground and their relationship to the Nile River and the Milky Way locks perfectly
at 12,000.
About 12,000 years ago, not on a single day, but over an epoch of about 1,000 years, and then it gradually shifts out, because this is a very, very slow change that takes place. So you have the ground saying 12,500 years ago, and you have the shaft saying 4,500 years ago.
So one might assume that those shafts were maybe carved out at a different time, potentially?
Well, yes. The way I look at it is, I think the site was sacred more than 12,000 years ago.
Right.
I think ground platforms were created there. It's important to remember the Great Pyramid is already built around a natural hill. The first 30 feet inside the Great Pyramid is a natural mound, and there are traditions in ancient Egypt of the primeval mound. And if you enter the Great Pyramid, and you may or may not have been able to do that when you went there.
I went in.
Did you get down to the subterranean chamber?
I think everything was. Oh no, we did. The subterranean was much bigger.
Was it a very rough-hewn chamber, cut out of solid bedrock, or was it a built chamber?
There's the built one that we saw. Is it called a sarcophagus? No.
Yes, that's the King's Chamber.
We went to the King's Chamber, but I believe that there was another one. I can't remember.
You can see that on the screen there. You can see the subterranean chamber. You see the entrance in the north face.
Yeah. No, I don't think we went that far.
And then
we went to.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's about 100 feet vertically beneath the base of the Great Pyramid.
Wow.
And it's about 600 feet beneath the apex of the Great Pyramid.
Wow.
And it's cut out of solid bedrock. And my view is, and it's only a theory, and I don't claim that I'm correct, it's just put this forward for thought, is that the original sacred site on the Giza Plateau was that natural primeval mound beneath which the ancients hewed out this enormous subterranean chamber, which is it looks like a rough, unfinished chamber, but it has curious acoustic effects. Which are in themselves very interesting. And then
that people talk about.
It's an amazing place to be, and actually you get a resonance. We tried an experiment with an opera singer up in the King's Chamber. You could hear her down in the subterranean chamber. Which is quite remarkable in itself. But I think that was the original sacred site. I think the ground platforms were put in position, and I think the ancient Egyptians finished off the job in a brilliant way. Overbuilding and commemorating and memorizing a site of enormous significance and importance to them.
Sorry, when you say finished off, I'm dumb, so I'm going to ask dumb questions. When you say finished off, what exactly do you theorize?
I think the vast majority of the Great Pyramids as we see them today were the work of the ancient Egyptians.
Okay, got it.
I think they were building on a prehistoric foundation.
Okay.
And it had been sacred for
So your point is not to
thousands.
take away from what ancient. You think they built most of it. You think we are just discounting that there might have been people here 12,500 years ago that also built
Correct, because that runs against the archaeological mainstream, and this is where you get into issues of geology and the issue of the Great Sphinx. Because I think, again, it's just my theory. I don't claim I'm 100% right, and everybody's got to listen to me and tell the Egyptologists to go away. Just my view is that on the Giza Plateau were the three massive ground platforms of the three Great Pyramids, the subterranean chamber beneath what is now the Great Pyramid, the megalithic temples, the so-called Vali Temple and the Sphinx Temple right beside the Sphinx, and the so-called mortuary temples. These are all megalithic that stand beside the Great Pyramids.
Those are the three little ones that are next to them?
No, those are the so-called satellite pyramids. Okay. But there are megalithic temples where, when I say megalithic, you're looking at structures where the largest single block weighs 200 tons. These are gigantic blocks of stone. But of particular interest, right in front of the Great Sphinx is an almost completely ruined one, and then just to the south of the Great Sphinx is a rather intact one called the Vali Temple. And this temple bears evidence of being built in two stages. Because when you look at it, you see that its core is made of limestone, enormous limestone blocks in the range of 50 to 100 tons each, maybe more.
You can bring this up, Mark?
In the one on the left, you can see the limestone blocks up at the top. That's the original structure. And I and my colleagues, and particularly Professor Robert Schock from Boston University, who is a geologist, are of the view that the ancient Egyptians renovated a far more ancient limestone temple. So you can see the weathering on the limestone temple, and then you can see the granite blocks that were added by the ancient Egyptians. And the puzzle of those blocks is that they are carefully cut to fit around the weathering in the limestone core blocks. So they were respecting those limestone core blocks. They weren't demolishing them. It would be easy just to cut them flat, if you're going to do this, but no, they didn't. They carefully cut each granite block so it would fit around the weathering pattern.
We'd only do that if you thought that a place was sacred.
You felt it was special, and you were trying to preserve it. Likewise, the Sphinx. Again, I need to pay tribute to others. I need to pay tribute to John Anthony West, who's an independent Egyptologist, brilliant man, dear friend
Rest
of mine.
in peace, right?
Yes, passed away in 2018. He used to call academics quackademics. He was a master of vitriol. And he was the first to draw attention to the possibility that the Great Sphinx may also be a multi-phase monument, not just a monument built in the 4th dynasty, 2500 BC or whatever. He pointed out that there seemed to be very strange erosion patterns. They're harder to see on the
fissures. There might be on the wall,
but on the surrounding trench, they're much easier to see. And then he brought Professor Robert Schoch from Boston University, who is a geologist, and Schoch agreed that what we're looking at here in the fissures around the side of the Great Sphinx, and to some extent on the body of the Sphinx, is what's called precipitation-induced weathering. It's not a flood.
Yeah.
It's weathering that's caused by exposure to a very long period of heavy rainfall.
Right.
And then you have to get into paleoclimatology. When did it rain on the Giza Plateau enough to cause this level of exposure and weathering? You can see the outer trench. The Great Sphinx is cut out of solid bedrock. They created a trench around its body, and the core body was left in place. I and my colleagues think that core body goes back 12,000 plus years. It was originally in the form entirely of a lion with a massive leonine head. But then, by the time that the dynastic period of ancient Egypt came along, the Great Sphinx was very damaged, particularly its head, jutting up above the plateau. And we suggest that at that time, the head of the Great Sphinx was recarved into a human head wearing a classic Nemes headdress of an ancient Egyptian pharaoh.
Can you bring up quickly the Sphinx that is covered up to its neck in sand? So this is what the ancient Egyptians probably were looking at,
yeah,
right?
they were looking at a monument cover, yeah, like that.
I mean, this is
there's many times during its history when that's all there was, you know. That was the bit that got damaged, and we think back 4,500 years ago, 2,500 BC, it was like that then too, but it was a lion head, and it was very damaged. And they felt they're going to recarve it into a human head, and it is out of proportion with the rest of the body.
Which again does give credit to the Egyptians. I'm just trying to cozy up to the Egyptian government here.
Yeah, we want you back in.
Also, the Hebrews are okay with this.
I think the ancient Egyptians massively venerated this site from the beginning. It was the place of the beginning. It was the place of the first time.
Yeah.
A time that they called Zet Tepi. And I think their project was to honor and memorialize it. And then this is where we get into spooky areas which the Egyptologists don't like, which is I'm suggesting that a body of knowledge was carried down within ancient Egyptian culture, and that a certain moment came when it was decided to turn the Giza Plateau back on again, and that body of knowledge was manifested in the construction of the Great Pyramids. It's very peculiar that the quality of workmanship on the Great Pyramid, and indeed on the other two pyramids of Giza, is extremely high. But go a generation later, 2 generations later, to the 5th dynasty, go to the pyramid of Unas at Saqqara, where the so-called pyramid texts are inscribed inside the so-called tomb chamber. And that pyramid, the exterior of it is a mess. It's very poorly built, very poorly constructed. You know, you look at it, it just looks like a heap of stones. Whereas the Great Pyramid today is still a majestic structure. Yeah. So it's as though they put everything they had into
try to replicate it, but they just
try to replicate. And then a generation or two later, they could. That's the pyramid of Unas.
Yeah. You know? What if it's just like the Knicks, where like the father did a really good job, and then the next generation just really fucked the whole thing up?
Yeah, I mean, it could be, but it's
pointless shots on my team. Like he is.
No, it's a fair point. You know, I mean, human societies go up and down, and that can happen. But that's my view also with the idea of a lost civilization, that we can have an apex and they can fall into a slump and they can come out again. But is knowledge preserved and passed down through the ages? Yes, I think it is.
Now, why wouldn't the people in the Nile Valley at that time, 12,000 years ago, also not be Egyptian? Like, could they still be ethnically Egyptian at that time?
Well, I think in a way, I'm actually deeply uninterested in ethnic matters. When I come to relate to and evaluate a fellow human being or a culture, I'm interested in the ideas that those people have. I'm not interested in their genes. I think actually genes are vastly overrated. They're the least important aspect of a human being. They've been blown up into huge importance in our culture today, but I think skin color, genes, ethnicity, none of these things really matter. Human beings are the same all over the world. It's been my privilege to travel the world intensely for the best part of 40 years. And whether I go to the remotest village in the remotest corner of the Amazon, or whether I find myself in New York City, once I get down to talking face to face with a fellow human being, they're just a fellow human being, just like me, and they have the same hopes, the same dreams, the same fears as every other human being. So I think we make too many divisions. I love cultural differences. Cultural differences are great. Differences in ideas are great, but genetic differences are trivial in my view. And the things that divide us as human beings are far less important than the things that unite us as human beings. And I think maybe it's high time we recognize that. So whether the modern Egyptians are ethnically connected in any close way to the ancient Egyptians is a matter that I regard as fundamentally unimportant. The modern Egyptians also honor and respect the Great Pyramids and ancient Egyptian culture, and that's what matters to me.
I'm curious, picking back on that, like, how do you feel about the criticism that you got some people saying you're racist after the Netflix update?
Well, that criticism was
because that's why we brought you on. We're like, we hope you're racist. We
You kind of let me down with this whole everyone's equal talk.
That was interesting. The subject of race is never mentioned in my Netflix series, Ancient Apocalypse. It's never mentioned at all. But when the Society for American Archaeologists wrote an open letter to Netflix demanding that my documentary series be reclassified as science fiction, they accused me of spreading racism, white supremacy, misogyny, and anti-Semitism. None of these issues are ever mentioned in the series.
Wait, what was misogynistic?
I don't know, and you know, what for that matter was anti-Semitic. It's very, and what was racist, since race is never mentioned. But what these labels are very useful for, if you shout them loudly enough, and if your friends in the media see a nice story here and pick them up and multiply it, what they're very useful for is turning people off the work of an opponent. And that was clearly what went on here.
You're radioactive. I don't even have to debate you because you're radioactive.
That's right. That's right. That's fundamentally what went on. Now, what is the reason for what was the possible? They had no justification for any of the others, but what was the reason for saying that I was spreading racism and white supremacy? It's because in a number of my earlier books, I reported indigenous myths and traditions, particularly from South America and from Mexico, which in some cases referred to a white-skinned, bearded stranger and his companions who came after a time of darkness, after a great cataclysm, bringing knowledge and teaching knowledge to the inhabitants of the country. Now, that is not me saying that, that is indigenous traditions. The view of archaeologists today is that many of those traditions were simply made up by the Spanish conquistadors. I don't think that's true. There are many other archaeologists who don't agree with that and think that they are true and genuine indigenous traditions and should be rightly reported as such. Whether we're referring to Quetzalcoatl in Mexico or to Viracocha in the Andes. These traditions, it's a pan-American myth, and they're not only found in the Americas, but all over the world. They don't always refer to a person as white skin. You know, the emphasis that's put on skin color today is really recent in human history. It's a few hundred years old. Did the issue of white skin or black skin carry the same resonance 12,000 years ago that it carries today? I somehow doubt it. I doubt it very much. I don't see why it should, because the abuses of human rights that were carried out in the name of color are recent developments. They're not ancient developments, you know, and therefore
recent in the scale of human history.
Recent in the scale of human history. Let's say the last 500 or 600 years, something like that. They weren't really there. They weren't really there before that. But it's a huge distraction from the major issue. They also refer to these individuals as being bearded. They often refer to there being 7 of them. In ancient Mesopotamia, they're called the 7 sages. In ancient Egypt, at the Temple of Horus at Edfu, they are also referred to as the 7 sages. In ancient India, it's Manu and the seven sages who appear after the flood, trying to restore the knowledge that was lost during the time of the flood. These are indigenous traditions.
Same story, different parts of the world.
Same story, different parts of the world. That's one of the things that interests me about it. What interests me about it least of all is the issue of skin color. What interests me about it most of all is the issue that there seems to be a memory of a cataclysm after which a group of people tried to preserve knowledge from
Is this
before
the Snow White myth?
I'm not sure.
She falls asleep, the 7 dwarfs, or the 7 sages, they come wake her up with the wisdom of a guy should make out with you when you're passed out.
I need to reread the Snow White.
There might be something there. This is good.
Yeah. Well, no, because myths are the memory bank of our species.
This is what I loved about the Netflix special. Treating the myths as a way of passing on true information.
Yes.
And taking them seriously, not looking at them as figments of imagination.
Yeah.
If we were to pass on data and fact, it's way more digestible in the form of story. We memorize stories.
If you wish to pass information to a distant future, if you wish it to be preserved, you wouldn't be smart to just write it down. How can we know that our script is going to be readable by any other culture? Let's say 10,000 years in the future. Will anybody be able to read the English language? Who knows? I have no idea. It's fragile. An example I often give is the Indus Valley civilization in Pakistan and India.
Come on, why?
The Indus
What
Valley
the
civilization,
fuck,
nobody
man?
actually knew that it existed
Why?
until it was accidentally discovered while a railway was being built through a site now called
Come on.
Mohenjo-daro. In Pakistan, and then they found that there were these actually very, very sophisticated, very complex mud brick structures on a very large scale. Then they began to look at it. Then they found that this culture had a language, a fully developed written script. It's about 5,000 years old, but there isn't a single Rosetta Stone that enables us to translate that script into any more recent language. So we can't read that script. The script exists, but we can't read it. So there could be all kinds of information in that script, which tells all kinds of things about our past, but it's not readable.
And how long ago were they thriving?
5,000 years ago.
Wow.
One of the interesting things in the Indus Valley civilization is that there is a particular seal that has survived, a seal that would have been used to stamp an imprint onto cloth or something like that. It's called the Pasupati seal, and it shows a figure which is recognizable as the god Shiva, who's of course an important deity in Indian culture to this day and in the Vedas, and it shows that individuals seated in that's the Pasupati seal. Well, what you'll see is that underneath it, the way his feet are organized is that his heels are pointed forwards. This is a really difficult yoga position, to sit like that and have your heels pointed forward. You've got to kind of almost disjoint your legs in order to do that. Okay, and the problem with that is that it's an advanced yoga position. It's found in a seal that's 5,000 years old. We have to ask ourselves how many thousands of years before that was yoga being developed.
Shit.
You know, again, there's a hint of a lost human culture in this. The posture is called Mula Bandhasana. I certainly can't do it.
Unbelievable. Because what do we date modern Indian civilization back to? Is it 5,000 years
since
ago?
the Indus
4,000.
Yeah, since the discovery of the Indus Valley civilization, you know, we have to accept that civilization in India is at least 5,000 years old. The largely and correctly discredited notion of an Aryan invasion of India needs to be abandoned as well. Yes, there were multiple cultures moving back and forwards, but Indian culture is extremely ancient.
5,000 years ago.
Yeah. And
Indus Valley, that's like a thing you learn about in textbooks.
Yeah, you learn about it now.
Accepting, yeah.
But what most people don't realize was nobody knew it even existed. It was a lost civilization.
And the language is completely independent. There's no connectivity to anything.
Nobody can connect it to anything. We don't know what it was. There's some suggestion that it may have been Dravidian peoples, the peoples who are now found primarily in southern India, people of the Tamils. As a matter of fact, my wife is Tamil.
Gotcha.
And that's been very helpful to us when we've been researching in southern India. We did a lot of diving in southern. My wife is a photographer and a diver, as I am, and we did a lot of diving in southern India. So it was great to be able to talk, for her to be able to talk in their own language to Tamil fishermen and Tamil divers, and see if they'd seen any weird stuff underwater, which they certainly had, and they took us to diving on structures that are a fully formed city off the town of Mahabalipuram.
Now, you speak about this in the documentary, but I think this is really important to understand as well, that most of human civilization has been organized around water, right? Close proximity to water, obviously you can fish, travel, etc. And as the water levels change, some of those ancient cities could be completely covered.
Yes.
You've recovered some of these, you've seen
This is one of the things that I think is missing from our understanding of the past. It amused me, but also irritated me, that in that open letter to Netflix, the Society for American Archaeologists claimed that they could absolutely for certain be sure that there was no lost civilization during the Ice Age. They knew, it was a fact, and if there had been any civilization, they would have found it, and they would have published it.
Right.
Well, how do they know that there was no lost civilization then? Because it's really important to understand that archaeology is often driven by accidental finds. A lot of archaeology, particularly in the industrialized countries, is the result of somebody building, there's a huge building project going on. Maybe a housing estate is going to be built, maybe a road is going to be built, maybe a railway is going to be built, maybe a dam is going to be built. And then let's call in the archaeologists to make sure that we're not going to wreck any ancient archaeology while we're doing this. And that's a lot of archaeological discoveries are made as a result of that, rather than of targeted inquiries. The second issue with ruling out completely the possibility of a lost civilization is that archaeology sets itself up as the sole arbiter as to what is and what is not evidence. So I and my colleagues argue that we should consider the possibility of a much older Great Sphinx, as we've just been discussing, on the basis of its geology. I'm just going to add a more complicated point. It's not only the geology. The Great Sphinx points perfectly due east. The sun rises perfectly due east on the spring equinox. If you go to the Giza Plateau or anywhere else in the world on the northern hemisphere, on the summer solstice, you're going to see the sun rising far to the north of east. Go there on the winter solstice, you're going to see it far to the south of east. But on the spring equinox, it rises perfectly due east, directly in line with the gaze of the Sphinx. The Sphinx is looking at where the sun rises at dawn on the 21st of March in our calendar. Now, because of this wobble on the Earth's axis.
What is that called again, the wobble?
It's called precession.
Precession,
imagine a spinning top, which is spinning and is kind of doing this.
Yeah.
And that's the viewing platform from which we observe the stars and the sun and the moon and everything else. And obviously the changes in its orientation are going to change their orientation. And that's why we get the astrological ages. Again, mainstream science sneers at these things, but it is a simple astronomical fact that there are 12 constellations that lie along the path of the sun, which is called the ecliptic, and they are the constellations of the zodiac. And right now we live in the age of Pisces, very near the end of the age of Pisces. It's a simple fact that the ancient Christians go back about 2,000 years.
The fish.
The fish was their thing. Before that, it was Aries, the ram. Ancient Egyptian symbolism at that time was very much focused on rams. Go back before that, it's the age of Taurus, roughly the Pyramid Age. That's why if you were building a huge 270-foot-long rock-hewn monument in the Pyramid Age, you'd be more likely to make it in the form of a bull than in the form of a lion.
Yeah.
Of a lion. Because there is a time when you go back, guess when, about 12,000 years, that you find it's the constellation of Leo that is rising behind the sun. That's the age of Leo. Just as we live in the age of Pisces, that was the age of Leo. And there was a time when that monument would have looked directly at the place where the sun rises first. It would have seen its own celestial counterpart, the constellation of Leo, sitting on the horizon, and then the sun rising beneath it. So to us, this, and I speak of myself, Robert Boval, Robert Schoch, John Anthony West, and a few others, we think it makes more sense, take the geology, take the astronomy. This monument has its origins 12,000 years ago. But Egyptologists say, no, we know the Sphinx was built 4,500 years ago. I'm not going to bore your audience with the details, but the evidence is incredibly flimsy. There isn't a single document that attributes the Great Sphinx to Khafre, who is supposed to be the builder of the Great Sphinx. There's nothing. It's just opinion, pure opinion. And we think that they are not right to dismiss the case for a much older Sphinx and to say that. So they select what evidence is evidence and what evidence isn't evidence. That's the second thing. And then the third and final thing is that huge areas of the world that have never been looked at by archaeology at all. or if looked at by archaeology, looked at only minimally. Of course, the most important are the flooded continental shelves, and that's why Santa and I spent 7 years of our lives, frequently risking our lives, scuba diving all around the world. Sea level rose 400 feet at the end of the last ice age. Let's be clear, it did not rise 400 feet overnight.
Right.
This was a rise that extended over a period of 11 or 12,000 years, from about 21,000 years ago down to 10,000. It was even still rising about 6,000 years ago.
All over the world?
All over the world, yeah. There was a global, all the world's oceans are connected, and all but in local areas, if you have a very steep coastline, the effect of the sea level rise and the amount of land it eats up is going to be a lot less than if you have a gradually sloping coastline. And 120 feet sea level rise on a very steep bit of coast is going to remove relatively less land, whereas on a very sloping bit of coast, it's going to inundate much more land. And the calculation is that 27 million square kilometers that was above water during the Ice Age is underwater now. Roughly, I think that's roughly 10 million square miles. I can't do the math in my head, but something like that. So it's an awful lot of land. I think it's Europe and China added together. It's not that there's been no archaeology done on the continental shelves. I think we're looking at something from Alexandria here.
Yes.
Yeah, we are. I've dived there as well. And that's inundated not because of sea level rise, but because of subsidence of the Nile silts. Alexandria stands on the Nile Delta, and the silts subsided and resulted in the flooding of this. The Nile carries a lot of silt with it, a lot of earth with it, as it flows out of Uganda and out of Ethiopia and northwards into Egypt, and you come to the Nile Delta, and all that earth it's carrying, which also provided the fertility of ancient Egypt, all that silt is then dumped in the Nile Delta, and there were constructions were made on top of it. And the submergence of the sites off Alexandria, which is a magical, spooky place to dive, by the way. I've been lucky enough to dive there. The submergence of those sites is largely because of subsidence of land rather than sea level rise, because it's relatively recent. Those
if
sites
you're saying the silt itself has dropped.
Yeah.
Right.
So anything built on
solid ground.
Yeah. Anything built on top of it went down.
Guys, I'm in different clothes. Why is that? Because we were able to add another special taping at White Oak Music Hall. I'm fighting to get everybody in. I appreciate the demand so much. So, tickets are being released today, the day this comes out. 10 a.m. Central Standard Time. That's Texas time. So hurry up and buy the tickets, please. I appreciate the demand so much. I want to get everybody in that I can. Also, speaking of adding shows, we are adding shows at Zany's in Nashville, July 14th and 15th. The 13th is sold out. I believe I'm going to be in Huntsville on the 12th. Also, I got a bunch more shows. Please check the website because tickets are selling out for these shows, and I don't have time. We got to get back to Graham Hancock. But thank you guys so much. AkashSingh.com. Hurry up and cop. Also, guys, if you need tickets to a show that might happen to be sold out, again, my special taping is an example. You know where you can find them? SeatGeek.
Who would ever pay to see this guy in a show ever?
Is SeatGeek will tell you how good or bad a deal is. Whatever tickets you need. If you see a green dot next to the ticket price, that means it's good. You should buy it. Red means don't buy it yet. Hold off. Something better is coming. No other ticket app is doing this for you. SeatGeek is where it's at. There are 28 million downloads on SeatGeek. It's the #1 rated ticketing app for a reason. And there are 70,000 events listed every single day. That includes concerts, sporting events, music festivals, more. Also, if you need Andrew Schultz tickets, wherever you are on the globe, SeatGeek might be able to help you. Why don't you look at that? And just because we at Flagrant always come through for you, we got a code. Use Flagrant for $20 off tickets at SeatGeek. Again, that's $20 off your first purchase with the promo code Flagrant. Make sure you do that right now. Just download the SeatGeek app on your phone, buy your first tickets, use a promo code Flagrant, you get $20 off. Now let's get back to the show.
Why is it a spooky place to dive?
Well, because you're coming across statues underwater, you're coming across columns underwater. The visibility is not perfect. It's a little bit kind of weird. And it's just magical in diving on an underwater city. But I cannot claim, and I do not claim that city is 12,000 years old. No, it's not. But I do claim that in connection with a giant stone circle called of Akijima in the Kerama Islands in Japan, which is 30 meters under sea level, where there has been no land subsidence, where you can calculate that it's been underwater for 12,000 years. I do absolutely claim that in terms of the enormous structures that lie off the coast of Mahabalipuram, in Tamil Nadu, in southeast India. Poonpahar, a little further south, there's a huge U-shaped structure underwater there that Santha and I dived on with a team from the National Institute of Oceanography in India. You have to be careful when you look at underwater structures. You have to look at all the conditions that have led to their submergence. And in some cases, it's very clear that they've been underwater for a very, very, very long time indeed. Malta, which we featured in Ancient Apocalypse.
Wait, when you went to Malta, did you go? Malta's the one that's divided. There's like an active civil war going on, right?
No, not for a long time.
But there's like a Turkish side and then a Orthodox Christian side, and they're basically like a border that they just kind of built.
No, not in
I'm not thinking
Cyprus. Not in Malta.
Oh,
No, what's up, King Nick? How are you, bro?
It could be Cyprus. Malta's
a wonderful tax haven and a good place to shoot.
Malta's a piece. Malta's
I guess it
has been for a long time. But Malta used to be joined to Sicily.
Flex Wednesday, what's up,
Malta
bro?
wasn't an island, it was part of the mainland.
Yeah.
Part of toe of Italy, Sicily, all the way out to Malta was all above water during the Ice Age and all underwater now. So one of my interests is
What's up? Have a good stream with someone. Yo, what's up, dude? Flex Wednesday. What's up, man?
In Malta
How are you, man?
is a repetition of the so-called cart ruts that you find above water in Malta as well, which have never been properly.
Cart ruts?
Yes, they're parallel tracks that are cut into the bedrock on the island of Malta. And they look actually like railway tracks in a way. I'm not claiming they were a railway, but they look, that's just a comparison. And there are even junctions in them. And nobody knows what they are. The word cart ruts is what they're called, but the notion that they were gradually cut out by carts being rolled over them doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It looks like they've been cut by hand, but more interesting is the fact that they continue underwater. And we've dived on those cart ruts down to 27 meters, which is
Why would he
80,
run?
90 feet, maybe.
Why would he do the
They've
animation?
been underwater for thousands and thousands.
Come on, man.
So then the issue becomes, are we secure on the dating of all the structures above water in Malta? And I suggest strongly that we're not.
Yeah.
There's been very little carbon dating done on the Maltese temples. That carbon dating is itself insecure. I'm doing a debate with a leading archaeologist on the Joe Rogan Experience on the 24th of October.
Joe be having people debate, huh? That's his thing.
It's a very good thing that this is happening. It's the first time that somebody representing the alternative point of view has actually been debated by somebody from the mainstream. The mainstream has normally said, "Now we don't want to talk to you guys. You're Looney Tunes. We're not going to give you a platform." But in this case, it is happening, and I have things to say about Malta that I'm going to preserve my ammunition for.
Nice. Can you give us a taste? Can you give us a little taste?
It's to do with the absolute insecurity of the carbon dating.
I see. Do you think there's any submerged pyramids?
Just to finish that point, carbon dating, by the way, and again, this is not something that everybody knows. Carbon dating can only date organic material. It can't date stone.
Yeah.
So if you're going to date a megalith according to the organic material found around you, you want to be pretty sure that the organic material dates from the same time as the megalith and wasn't introduced later. Right.
And there's no way in proving that it is or it isn't.
Well, it's very difficult. It's very difficult to do. And the fact is, there are very few carbon dates from Malta, and the new dating work that's been done there hasn't added usefully to that database.
And when are you doing this on Joe's Pod?
So 24th of October. The archaeologist who's going to debate me is called Flint Dibble. He's American, but he teaches at the University of Cardiff in Wales, in Britain. His father was a famous archaeologist called Harold Dibble. Flint has been very pointed and aggressive in his attacks on me following the Netflix show, which he has every right to be. I had wanted to debate another archaeologist who's called John Hoops from the University of Kansas, because he has been by far the most obnoxious in leveling these ad hominem attacks against me, and straw men attacks, like Hancock says this, Hancock says that, when Hancock doesn't say either this or that. But if you say it enough, it begins to have an effect. And I would have liked to have called John Hoops to account and invited him to debate me, but unfortunately he backed out and he wouldn't do it. Flint Dibble, and this is genuine, Flint Dibble has had some health issues. I won't go into the details. And we've not been certain until very recently whether he will be able to make it. But kudos to him. It looks like he is going to make it.
Great.
And what he's doing and what I'm doing on the 24th of October is we're both putting our reputations on the line. This is a
Pay-per-view event.
This is a high stakes. This is a high stakes issue for both me and him.
Yes.
Because, you know, anything can happen in a debate. I certainly intend to make sure that I'm properly prepared. I'm sure he's going to make sure he's properly prepared. I hope we can end up hugging each other and finding some common ground rather than all of this hatred. You know?
Okay, now...
Sorry, there's one question. I'm sorry to interrupt, but as society got more advanced in this time, it seems we have less and less dependence on astronomy. Astronomy, when I'm thinking 4,005 years ago to now, it just kind of filled in the blanks of what we couldn't figure out on our own. So 12,000 years ago, if there's a really advanced civilization, why would astronomy play as big of a role in them where everything is pointing to X, Y, and Z stars?
Well, first of all, let's consider what we mean by advanced. What is an advanced civilization? Are we really an advanced civilization? Do we look around at much of our culture that we would say, that's incredibly advanced? Or are we talking tech? Are we talking tech? We're technological.
And like scientifically,
Yeah, we believe that is advanced. And that is one of the mistakes in looking for a quote-unquote advanced civilization in the past, is that we tend to be looking for ourselves in our past. Whereas it's possible for a civilization to be advanced in other ways. We could not measure longitude. Very important issue if you're a navigator and a sailor. We could not measure longitude until 1760s, 1750s, and sometime in the second half of the 18th century. It took the creation of a very precise marine chronometer in order to be able to calculate what your longitude is. Otherwise, in the middle of a stormy night, you could find yourself 300 miles west of where you thought you were and crashing into a coastline. It's a really good thing to know.
Why?
There was
$1
million in the 18th century was a lot of money. There was $1 million British pounds.
I hate this game. I really hate this game.
And it wasn't until the second half of the 18th century that it was solved. Wow. So it's weird that on ancient maps, copied from even more ancient source maps, there are precise longitudes, precise relative longitudes. This is one of the things that suggests to me that a civilized... The second thing is those maps show the world as it looked during the last ice age. Thirdly, and most important, they show Antarctica. Our civilization didn't discover Antarctica until 1820. So if I find a map from 1520 showing Antarctica, where the map maker informs us that he based his map on much older source maps that were falling to pieces, and that he know that will fall completely apart, he's preserved the information in those maps on his map. He's copying from older sources, and there is Antarctica. So did they just make it up? That's what
Why do we still call it Antarctica? That was another thing that was like...
Well, the opposite of the Arctic.
Yeah, but it's
Why?
It's like, bro, he called it Antarctica. Why don't you just look at the map? You're going to call it the same, you know what I mean?
Yeah, we call it Antarctica. They used to call it Terra Australis, the southern land. If you go for the Orontius Phineas map, for example, you'll find a much better
Yeah, I thought that map said Antarctica. That's very good.
Yeah.
Tripped out.
Oh, I actually am really excited that we're talking about Antarctica.
Yeah. Antarctica is an interesting
This
place.
is my newest rabbit hole.
It's one of those great you see, there's Antarctica. That's the Orontius Phineas.
Right.
There's South Africa, and there's Antarctica, and there's the tip of South America, almost touching Antarctica. It's a bit bigger than it is today, but it would have been like that during the last ice age. That's a map from 1531, and what they're saying in the legend is that here in this map I expose regions that neither Eudoxus nor, I forget the names of all the ancient maps. None of them knew about it. They were hidden in darkness, but here they are. Hidden in darkness, I suggest they're hidden in darkness on ancient maps that Orontius Phineas copied from.
Wow.
It's an anomaly that it's sitting there. And it's not good enough to say that those map makers just wanted to balance the world, so they put a fantasy continent there, which later turned out to actually be there.
Right.
That's roughly what they're saying now. So that suggests to me a culture that was capable of exploring and mapping the Earth during the last ice age. The second issue is precisely astronomy. It's ancient knowledge of precession, which, again, our culture attributes to the Greeks, roughly between 300 BC and 100 BC. They're supposed to have been the discoverers of precession. Precession is very hard to observe. In a single lifetime, it's a fraction of an inch on the horizon, the change. So you have to keep records over long periods of time. You have to have a system that preserves those records and passes them down. So it's the knowledge of precession that is manifested in ancient mythology and in ancient traditions, often traditions that speak of a global flood. The Vedas themselves contain numbers that are related to precession. Again, I don't want to get too boring, but precession proceeds at the rate of 1 degree every 72 years, and this is the key number that is found in ancient mythology around the world, and variations of that number. So 72 plus 36 is 108. 108 is another precessional number. 108 divided by 2 is 54. That's another precessional number. That's why on the bridge at Angkor Thom in Angkor in Cambodia, you have 54 figures on either side of the bridge. And what are they doing? They're hauling on the body of the serpent Vasuki, who is wrapped around Mount Mandara, and they are churning the Milky Ocean. The argument is that this is a symbol for precession, that is taking place there, and the numbers are multiplied. And another example I often give is the Great Pyramid itself. And it's very important, I made this point at the beginning, it's very important that when people want to check this calculation, that they use the true original height of the Great Pyramid, the 481 feet that it would have risen to, rather than its rather stunted 450 plus feet today. When you use the true original height of the Great Pyramid and multiply it by 43,200, you get the polar radius of the Earth. And when you measure the base perimeter of the Great Pyramid and multiply it by 43,200, you get the equatorial circumference.
Why?
Now, why does 43,200 matter? It's 600 times 72. It's another precessional number. It's a number generated by the precessional motion of the Earth itself. And there we enter a very clever piece of work. Great Pyramid is almost perfectly aligned to true north. It's within 3/60ths of a single degree of true north. It's an error, but it's really good. When you look at a monument on that scale, 6 million tons, 481 feet tall, you know, and you get it within 3/60ths of a degree of true north, you are doing very accurate work. And you're saying something else.
I think they figured that out back in the day.
Oh yeah, they used astronomy. They used astronomy to figure it out.
But no, that they messed up on it.
I think they did the best they could. We also have to take account of movements of the Earth itself.
No, how did they not shoot it out?
Like shift in the tectonic plates underneath. I'm not sure, but the fact is it's 3/60ths off now.
Okay.
What it does tell us, apart from the level of accuracy, is that when they made that monument, they wanted to lock it in to the key cardinal directions. It's perfectly true north, perfectly true south, perfectly true east, perfectly true west, within 3/60ths of a single degree. And the cardinal directions of this planet mattered. They were speaking to the Earth with that number. Secondly, it's located on latitude 30 degrees north, give or take a few seconds long. And latitude 30 degrees north is 1/3 of the way between the equator and the North Pole. Okay, so that's not an insignificant latitude. It's a significant latitude. It seems like the monument is speaking to the Earth. And then we find that it encodes the dimensions of the Earth on a scale provided by a key motion of the Earth itself, namely the Earth's precession, operating at the rate of 1 degree every 72 years. Multiply that by 600, you get 43,200. That's the scale the pyramid is built on, 1 to 43,200. So it's a monument that speaks to the Earth, that is aligned to the cardinal directions of the Earth, and that encodes the dimensions of the Earth on a scale defined by the Earth itself.
And nobody would object to this at all?
Nobody that I know of, once they get the measurements right and realize that they're not dealing with a 450-foot tall monument, but a 481-foot tall monument, nobody disputes that. But pi, which is used to calculate the diameter and circumference of a circle, is built into the Great Pyramid. This is broadly accepted by It's just that they regard it as a coincidence.
And your theory is also that the ancient Egyptians did this, right? Because you said they did most of the work.
Yeah, so, I think they did. I think it was finished off. You define the very moment you start building that 52-degree slope into all the sides, you're defining what the apex is going to be.
Right.
That's there from the beginning.
And what was their daily ritual use for the pyramids of Giza that you theorize?
Well, actually nobody has any idea. The Great Pyramid was sealed. It was a sealed monument. So in roughly 900 AD, forgive me if I don't give you the exact date, give or take 50 years, the Caliph al-Mamun, who was running Egypt at the time, wanted to get inside the Great Pyramid. This is 400 years before the earthquake. The facing stones are still in place. He could not find the true entrance to the Great Pyramid. It turned out that it could have been found. According to accounts, there was some sort of, almost like a button that you pressed, and the doorway would slide, the facing stones would slide away, and you could find the true entrance. But he couldn't find that. But he did know that other pyramids had their entrance in the north face, other older pyramids, like the Pyramid of Unas. He knew they had their entrance in the north face. So he started hacking away at the north face of the Great Pyramid. And that is the entrance through which you will have gone when you entered the Great Pyramid. It's called Mamun's Hole. He and his team hacked it out with sledgehammers and chisels, and they broke their way in to the north face. And then as they were doing so,
I hate this
they
game.
heard a block falling in a hollow space.
Why? It's so laggy.
That block that fell, caused by the vibrations that they had caused, must have been in some kind of passageway or chamber. So they headed towards that sound, and that's where they found the original passageway system of the Great Pyramid, which after you've gone through Mamun's Hole, gone round a little corner where it's all cut out of the rock, and then you find yourself going up into first of all, the ascending corridor, and then the Grand Gallery, which is the most majestic structure. They found the original entrance system in that way, and now the true original entrance is open, but it's not used by tourists who enter the Great Pyramid.
Okay, I want to talk about Antarctica. Because I think this is going to be the new obsession. I feel like it's trending super high. Who knows if there's any truth to it, but a friend of ours, who will remain nameless, went there. Got to cool experience, trip, etc. And he said a couple interesting things. He said the mountains looked eerily pointy and four-sided. He said way more mountainous than he thought it would be. I think the illusion made from looking at maps and watching penguins.
By the way, you can see mountains. You can see mountains on the Orontius Phineas map version.
Oh, is that what the little etch is?
I hate this fucking game.
Those are mountains.
Now, he also said this. He said a couple things. He said there is a pact with every country that has a slice of it that they will not dig or remove any minerals from Antarctica. And he even said that a scientist was there, said to them, World War III will not start until one of these countries breaks that pact. They are clearly protecting or preserving something that may or may not be under, I believe it's 3 miles, Mark was saying earlier, at its thickest of ice. Now, Mark, maybe you should describe the thing that you were saying before about there was a time where Antarctica...
I was reading an article that perhaps 90 million years ago, there was a lush rainforest that is now covered in miles of ice on the Antarctic continent.
Yeah, that's probably true. If you go back that far, you would find that the Earth's climate was very different from how it is today. And there's undoubtedly a time, they found fossils on Antarctica, there's undoubtedly a time when Antarctica was lush and green. The question is, was it lush and green during the lifetime of the human species?
Yes, this is where it gets tricky.
And this is where it gets tricky. The Homo sapiens line descends from a line that goes back about 6 million years, not much further than that, if we accept conventional evolutionary theory. So 6 million years ago, Antarctica is supposed to have been as cold and as frozen as it is today. Now, when I wrote Fingerprints of the Gods in 1995, which is my first book tracing the possibility of a lost civilization, I was very interested in Antarctica, and I was interested in it because of the work of a previous researcher called Charles Hapgood. Charles Hapgood wrote a number of very important books. One of them is called Maps of the Ancient Sea Kings, which precisely goes into this issue of ancient maps that don't fit our understanding of what the world was, how the world was supposed to be known at that time. And another is called The Path of the Pole. And he proposed a phenomenon that he called Earth crust displacement, whereby from time to time, the entire outer crust of the Earth, like the skin of an orange, might shift, leaving the core of the Earth in place, that it could shift. Like, so if you imagine a very loose orange skin, the fruit is inside, it's staying in place, but you're shifting the skin around it. Well, obviously then, if that happens, Antarctica could have been in warmer latitudes and could have been shifted into colder latitudes.
And how often does this happen?
Well, does it happen at all is the first question. I mean, of all the theories I've looked at and supported, this is the one that I've come in for the most criticism for. And I've been much more interested recently in the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis and the notion that a cataclysm occurred around 12,800 years ago, caused by impacts of comet fragments, and we can go into that. But when I wrote Fingerprints of the Gods, although I was interested in comets, I was more interested in Earth crust displacement. And the standard academic response to that is, look, Antarctica's been frozen for millions of years, and that rules out the whole Earth crust displacement argument. I think that even those who are still researching this field would prefer it to be the mantle rather than the crust of the Earth that moves. Again, it's very technical, that moves in one piece.
But the idea is
an Italian admiral called Flavio Barbiero who wrote an article for my website suggesting that Earth crust displacement could be kicked off by a comet impact where it hits the Earth a glancing blow and causes a shift of this kind taking place. But by and large, I don't argue these days that Antarctica and Earth crust displacement are the mechanism we should be looking at. I'm much more interested in the very solidly scientifically grounded Younger Dryas impact. Back in 1995, when I wrote Fingerprints of the Gods, I was searching around for many possibilities that could have caused a global cataclysm in the range of 12 to 13,000 years ago, because that's what all the astronomy pointed at, 12 to 13,000 years ago. And Hapgood's theory seemed to me a very valuable and useful one. I still won't write it off. I won't dismiss it entirely, but I've shifted in the direction.
Come on, why?
The Younger Dryas hypothesis. Simply because I'm in a constant argument with mainstream academia. And the issue to me, the most important issue to me, is the issue of a global cataclysm at the end of the Ice Age. What caused that cataclysm is a secondary issue. The cataclysm itself is the primary issue. And I found the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis a better, much more scientifically grounded explanation for that cataclysm than the notion of Earth crust displacement.
But do any archaeologists or any of these prehistorians dispute the Younger Dryas?
There's still a lot of argument around it. There's about 60 major scientists who are involved in the Comet Research Group. They're all credentialed scientists. They've all published dozens of papers in peer-reviewed journals, including Nature, including scientific reports, and many, many others on the hypothesis. But there's also a group of academics who are opposed to it and dispute that any impact ever took place. And then, even in those who do accept that the Younger Dryas was a cataclysm, some think that it may have been caused by solar activity rather than by comet impact.
How would that work?
Well, it could work at the end of the Younger Dryas. There are two moments in the Younger Dryas. The beginning is 12,800 years ago. It's a very strange moment in Earth history. This is when the world's climate, which has been warming up for a few thousand years, the Ice Age is still very much present. Big ice caps on North America, big ice caps on Northern Europe, but it's been warming up gradually. And then 12,800 years ago, two things happened at once. First, a sudden cataclysmic drop in climate. It gets incredibly cold. As cold as it was at the peak of the Ice Age more than 20,000 years ago. It gets incredibly cold, but then puzzlingly, there's a release of water into the world ocean. I say puzzlingly because when the Earth is freezing, you would not expect meltwater to be going into the world ocean. It should be staying on the ice caps. And I cite the work of Cesare Emiliani and his work on the submergence of Bahamian corals. This is how do you know that sea level rose? There are certain corals that can only exist within a certain number of feet of the sea's surface.
Because they need the sunlight.
Yeah, and when they drown, that tells you the sea level has risen. And they point to a significant sea level rise 12,800 years ago at exactly the moment of the steep freeze. The comet impact hypothesis explains that, because it says that the shock at the heat of the impact of large fragments of a comet on the North American and European ice caps would have been sufficient to release that freezing water into the world ocean, to cut the Gulf Stream. That's the central heating system of our planet. It's called the global meridional overturning circulation. It's these currents of warm and cold water that flow around the planet, and the Gulf Stream was cut and the Earth got extremely cold. So I think the comet impact hypothesis does best explain that. But
So just real quick, so comet hits,
Yeah.
cuts the Gulf Stream. Cutting the Gulf Stream.
it cuts the
causes-
Gulf Stream because it releases a huge quantity of meltwater from the North American ice cap almost instantaneously.
So the comet hits the ice
Yeah,
that is in North America
and Europe.
and Europe. That water cuts the Gulf Stream
Yes.
because it releases all this, which was frozen
Freezing water
Got you.
goes into
got
the
you.
world ocean. And
Temperature plummets.
temperature plummets.
But at the same time, there's much more potential water in the oceans, so that when the temperature does rise, now you have that meltwater.
Well, now we need to go on. 12,800 years ago, in the 1,000 or 1,200 years after that, that's a window when all the great Ice Age megafauna go extinct.
megafauna are
Saber-toothed tigers,
Right.
woolly mammoths, mastodons,
Right.
giant sloths, the whole collection
Yep.
of famous Ice Age megafauna, they all go extinct in that window. And clearly they didn't go extinct for no reason. There's the cataclysm of the Younger Dryas that made them extinct.
Have you seen the? Oh God, what is the gentleman's name? He's a guy who I believe like excavates up in Alaska for gold.
I hate this
Pretty
game.
sure it is. I'm forgetting what it is right now.
Why?
But they're like images of woolly mammoths who have like their legs completely
Like, what
shattered,
the fuck, man?
but they're intact.
Yeah.
And
Is this a boneyard that's been?
Yes,
found?
yeah,
It's the
yeah,
boneyard,
yeah,
yes,
yeah,
yes.
yeah.
That's right. That's very, very, very interesting. I've not been there. I've not looked into it yet, so I can't speak authoritatively about it.
but it might speak to your opinion right there. It's like,
What I can
else would-
say is that at Serrania de Lindosa in Colombia, there is an 8-kilometer long rock art panel dated to 12,800 years ago, which shows these megafauna. It shows many of the extinct megafauna from that period. To get back to the point, so we have this window of about 1,200 years where the Earth is very cold, the megafauna go extinct. But then 11,600 years ago, just as fast and dramatically as the Earth went cold, the Earth goes warm. You're looking at a 10-degree rise in global temperatures in a couple of hundred years. It goes very, very, in geological terms, very high, rapid and very fast. And sea level rises very quickly.
And what is the cause of that?
11,600 years ago, it's called meltwater pulse 1b. There's another collapse of the ice sheets and huge amounts of water go into the world ocean. Now that could realistically be caused by a sudden burst of solar activity, which melted down those ice sheets. But that's not what I go with. I still prefer the notion that we're dealing with multiple bombardments from comet fragments. And in this case, you're looking at a comet fragment that goes into a world ocean. That sends up a huge amount of water vapor into the upper atmosphere, creates a greenhouse effect, and accounts for the warming that takes place at that time.
So two comets. One that cooled things down and one that heated things up.
Yeah.
Any idea why one would cool down and one would heat up?
Depends where the impact is. If the impact's on an ice cap and it's releasing enormous amounts of meltwater into the world ocean, you're going to make the world very cold. If the impact's in a world ocean and it's putting a huge amount of water vapor into the upper atmosphere, it's a greenhouse effect. And the world is going to get warmer. It's all theory. It's not fact. What is fact is the sudden warming at the end of the Younger Dryas and the sudden freezing at the beginning of the Younger Dryas.
So we're searching for explanations for that.
We're
That's what
searching for
you
explanations.
described.
I've picked the one I back, but I'm not claiming that I have to be right. It's what I do think is really important is recognizing this was a global cataclysm. It was sustained. It wasn't just a minute. It went on for 1,000 years plus, and it's in our backyard. It's in very relatively recent human history. We're almost at the edge of history when we go to 11,600 years ago. That's weirdly the date that Göbekli Tepe in Turkey is built, 11,600 years ago. That weirdly is the date that Plato's Timaeus and Critias gives for the submergence of Atlantis, 11,600 years ago, before our time.
So what's happening to humanity in this 1,200-year window?
I need to be clear about that.
What
Okay,
the fuck?
because archaeologists roll their eyes at any mention of Atlantis. If you even say the word Atlantis,
Right.
you're automatically regarded as a member of the lunatic fringe.
Okay.
And if you've even said that word, all your work, all the 30 years of work you've done, the 1,000 dives that you've done on continental shelves all around the world, all of those can be written off simply because you said the word Atlantis.
It's flat Earth for archaeologists.
Yeah, it's flat.
Oh,
it's
yeah.
flat
Yeah,
Earth. And they detest the use
Now
of
tell us why the Earth is flat.
Well, that's one theory I definitely don't buy into.
No. Give us the Atlantis theory.
So the story of Atlantis comes down to us from Plato. It's expressed in two dialogues, the Timaeus and the Critias.
Okay.
Plato was writing at around 300 BC.
Does that come from his uncle?
Yeah, it's arguably from a member of his family line, who was the Greek lawmaker Solon,
Solon, yeah.
who did make a famous and documented visit to Egypt around the year 600 BC.
And he was told in Egypt.
And he was at the Temple of Neith at Sais in the Delta, and there are these inscriptions on the walls. That temple no longer exists. It's a ruin in the Delta now. There are these writings on the walls, and he asks a priest, what do the writings say? And the priest spoke Greek and ancient Egyptian, and he told Solon what the writings say, that there was this great civilization, that it was destroyed in an enormous flood. Plato, or Solon, refers to it as Atlantis. Atlantis is not an ancient Egyptian word. It looks like some attempt to translate into a meaningful Greek phrase what was originally an ancient Egyptian phrase. And that ancient Egyptian phrase, I can tell you pretty much for sure, was the homeland of the primeval ones. And I'll tell you why in a minute. But the point is that then Solon asks, when did this happen? And the priests say, they're very relaxed about it. They say, 9,000 years ago. So immediately we have a date that we can put to our calendar. 600 BC, he makes the visit. 9,000 years before that, that's 9,600 BC. Give or take 23 years, that is 11,600 years ago. That's when Göbekli Tepe is built. That's when Meltwater Pulse 1b begins to flood the world oceans. And again, my critics will niggle away at the edges of this and say, well, Meltwater Pulse 1b unfolded over 300 or 400 years. If you average it out, it wasn't that much in any one year. But who says it happened at average rates? Who says there wasn't a big rise and then a smaller rise? Yeah. These things are very annoying. But the bottom line is 9,000 years before Solon is 9,600 BC. That's the Atlantis date. That's Göbekli Tepe's date. And then secondly, the Temple of Horus at Edfu in Upper Egypt is very important. There's been, I worked with a partial translation.
Edfu is
in Upper Egypt. It's sort of halfway to Aswan. In southern Egypt. It's kind of middle.
Aswan is the quarry, I believe, where they
Aswan is the quarry where they got a lot of the granite that they brought. There's about 500 kilometers south, but Edfu's a bit further north than that. But it's also on the Nile. Now, the Temple of Horus at Edfu is a relatively recent temple, probably built around 270 BC by the Ptolemaic dynasty of ancient Egypt. These were Greeks who had overtaken ancient Egypt. But although they colonized ancient Egypt colonized their minds, and they became ancient Egyptians, more ancient Egyptian than the ancient Egyptians themselves, in many ways.
It's like when white people go to Hawaii.
All right, guys, we're gonna take a break real quick because you need to upgrade your room. If you still got posters hanging up in your room, that shit looks childish, and you have to upgrade. That's where Display comes in. Display is a one-of-a-kind metal poster that captures your unique passions. They are sturdy, magnet-mounted, and last a lifetime. You can customize, collect, rearrange them all. Display has both branded and artistic work. They have over 1 million designs available. They got official designs from Marvel, DC, both. That's crazy. And the NBA. So whether you want to buy a display for yourself or gift a display, they have a Floyd Mayweather. I happen to be very good friends, brothers you could even say, with a massive Floyd Mayweather fan. They also have a Guardians of the Galaxy one. That same friend loves Guardians of the Galaxy 3. I could get them a display. Display is unique, easy, it's safe and magnet mounted, so it takes 20 seconds. You don't gotta drill holes in a wall and then pay for it when you move out of your apartment or make your home look bad. Magnet mounted in 20 seconds. Display delivers its products worldwide in only 4 to 5 business days as well, so it's a perfect alternative, and really not alternative, upgrade for standard posters. To upgrade your room, go to display.com/flagrant and use our code flagrant at checkout to get 20% off for 1 or 2 displays. 30% off if you buy 3 or more. So the more you buy, the more you save. Go to displate.com/flagrant. Again, that's DISPLATE. sunshine.com/flagrant right now. Now let's get back to the show. All right, we're going to take a break real quick because if you're drinking, you might as well drink an adult beverage that's better for you, not some can of beer filled with a bunch of bullshit ingredients you've never heard of.
I hate
or
this
some
guy.
cheap-ass vodka that's going to make your
I really
hangover
despise
crazy
this
and make your
guy
life
talking
worse.
right now.
You need June Shine. They have tons of easy-to-drink, to-go, better-for-you adult beverage options. They got margaritas, vodka sodas, rum cocktails made with premium ingredients and no added sugar. Unlike traditional canned cocktails that can have 20-plus grams of sugar. Again, I don't drink, but if you're gonna drink something that is better for you. Got less sugar, got less carbs, not bullshit ingredients.
This
And
guy's
best of all,
advertising and he
just
doesn't
to be
even
that
drink
crazy,
it.
I just had
It's
a lot
just
of
too
sugar
much.
hangover. You give you a nice light, bright buzz. June Shine can be found in over 10,000 stores across the country. It's available at all the big retailers you're already visiting for groceries and alcohol. Whole Foods, Target, Ralph's, Vaughn's, Bevmo, Kroger, all of them. We've worked out a special offer for our listeners as well, as we always do. At any store, you can buy one June Shine package and get the second one for only a penny. That's $12 to $20 off. Fuck that, though. The value dollar amount don't matter. You get two for the price of one. I recommend trying one of their best-selling variety packs. It's a great way to try all their delicious flavors. So to do that, you go to juneshine.com/flagrant and text them a photo of your receipt, and they will Venmo you immediately. That's immediate. Venmo's right in your bank account. You don't gotta wait for a mail-in rebate that you're gonna lose. None of that. Right in your bank account. Just do it. It's that
I hate
easy.
this human being.
JUNESHINE.com/flagrant. Now let's get back to the show.
Inscribed on the wall of that temple, not in the language of ancient Egypt as was spoken 270 BC, but in Middle Egyptian, which goes back to about 2000 BC, carefully inscribed, and we're informed that it's based on temple archives. See that a temple stood there before the Ptolemies rebuilt that temple, and it stood on the foundations of an even older temple. The archives were preserved. That's what's inscribed on the walls. It's inscribed in Middle Egyptian. It's about 2000 BC, and it tells the whole Atlantis story. It just doesn't call it Atlantis. It speaks of a sacred island. It calls it the homeland of the primeval ones. It speaks of a great serpent that comes from the sky and splits the island in two. It speaks of a huge flood that arises and kills off almost all the divine inhabitants, apart from a few survivors, who then travel around the world. One of the places they go to is Egypt, and they make their first business to build primeval mounds in ancient Egypt that will be the places, the locations of all future temples and pyramids. The Edfu text is very clear. Now, I just need to make this clear because I relied on Eve Elizabeth Raymond, who was an early translator of the Edfu texts. But recently, the Edfu texts have been completely translated, every single word, into German by a gentleman called Dieter Kurth, and they've translated it all into German. It would be nice if it were all into English because that's much more widely spoken.
What does it say in German? The
Well,
Jews did not
what it
build
says
the
in
pyramid.
it supports everything in the original translation. There's not a single part of the original translation that's debunked by this. It supports it, and it adds information that wasn't there, because the reference in those Edfu texts to the destruction of the homeland of the primeval ones is 7,000 years ago, but that's in Middle Egyptian, which dates back to 2000 BC, so it goes back to 9000 BC again.
In 9000 BC is 11,000.
Yeah, it brings us to the same date. So I think that Egyptologists have been too hasty to dismiss Plato's story.
Real quick, so we can just understand what was said. The snake that comes down, like you said, the Netflix special, we can look at comets as potentially snakes.
Cosmic serpents.
So this comet that comes and hits the island of Atlantis, that's like a direct shot.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
But so maybe it doesn't hit exactly the island, but it's hitting close enough where the effects of that hit are going to dramatically affect the island.
And remember, they didn't call it Atlantis. They called it the homeland of the primeval.
And what does that mean, the primeval ones?
The ancient ones lived there. That was their homeland.
They created the mounds.
Who then, their survivors, who included 7 sages, traveled around the world seeking to rebuild their lost civilization.
And we've heard this.
And Egypt was one of the places they went to.
Okay, now, some people say that Azores Plateau might be Atlantis. Have you ever been there? And maybe we can describe really quickly where that is.
Well, it's in the Mid-Atlantic, and on the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. The Mid-Atlantic Ridge is interesting because there's a phenomenon called isostasy. Isostasy is the Earth's surface is a little bit fluid. If you put a heavy weight on one bit of it, it's like the end of a seesaw. It's going to force the other bit up. So in Britain, we had an ice cap on northern Scotland. But right now, the Isle of Wight in the English Channel, far to the south, is sinking beneath the ocean. Why is that? Because the ice cap on northern Scotland pushed northern Scotland down and lifted up the Isle of Wight. Since the ice cap's gone, the Isle of Wight is going back underwater.
You see this in the islands off of Italy, like Capri. Is starting to shift and rotate a little bit.
It's isostasy that causes that. And isostatic rebound in this case. And there is some indication that the ice cap on North America may have had an effect on the mid-Atlantic ridge and may have raised it to a higher level than it was today.
Oh, so wait a minute.
But I'm not. I need to be clear. I'm not looking for Atlantis there or anywhere. I don't think there was one location. Every story and reference, and I don't think we should be looking for a genetic location for it either.
Right.
Just as it would be really hard to look for a genetic location of America today, the U.S. culture is a multicultural society. There's the multi-ethnicity society. I suspect, quote unquote, Atlantis was like that. I suspect that it was all over the world. That it occupied the best real estate on Earth. The lands that are now under a few hundred feet of water, caused by.
But if we knew where it was, we could at least look for some sort of remains.
If there were, if there was a definite heartland for it, I think we should be looking for those remains on flooded continental shelves all around the world, and that's what I spent 7 years of my life doing. Was diving on the continental shelves and finding again and again ruins and structures that weren't supposed to be there. I think there's the whole story of humanity that's missing underwater. And while I'm saying that, I would like to give credit to archaeologists. There is some work now being done, marine archaeology, which isn't any longer just looking for shipwrecks from the medieval period or even from the 20th century or 19th century, but are looking at the flooded continental shelves. And it's just started. This work should have been happening for decades. It's just beginning. I think that's going to reveal a great deal. And I know it's going to reveal a great deal because I found a great deal. But I want to add that the Amazon rainforest and the Sahara Desert are also underserved by archaeology. And we can't claim that there was no lost civilization of the Ice Age while there's so much of the world we never looked at all.
Especially the Sahara Desert, right? Because there could be thousands of pyramids just covered in mounds of sand right now.
They really could.
We are finding a lot in the Amazon.
Yes.
The LiDAR in the Amazon.
The LiDAR work in the Amazon is fascinating.
Okay, I
hope to be back in the Amazon within the next few months.
Okay, while we're talking about Amazon, ayahuasca.
Yes.
Psychedelics.
I'm into this.
Okay.
Do psychedelics.
Yes. And how they tie into
these myths
in ancient civilization and potentially using the knowledge or experience gained from these psychedelic drugs to maybe build these huge megalithic structures. How big a role do you think psychedelics have played in prehistory?
Well, it's one of the reasons why we should never look for ourselves in the past, because we've had the horrific, vicious, evil thing called the war on drugs for the past 50 plus years, which is gradually going away, thank God. You know, but we're a culture that's hated psychedelics since the time of Richard Nixon, and we kind of just assume that every culture.
This is gonna be the last one of the night.
No, they didn't.
Yeah, probably.
They were deeply involved with psychedelics. Whether you're talking about the Eleusinian mysteries in ancient Greece.
What's that?
It was a temple, the Temple of Eleusis. It stands just outside of Athens, in Greece. What's left of it. They served up a potion to all the initiates. And the initiates included Sophocles, Pindar, Plato himself. All the great minds of ancient world went to Eleusis. They were given this brew, which was called the kykion. Then they went down into these deep chambers underneath the temple of Eleusis. And then they had extraordinary experiences, which gave them revelations about the nature of reality. They ceased to fear death. They knew that they knew that death was not the end. They had no fear of death anymore. After they'd had this experience. Sounds a lot like a psychedelic experience. And then we have the work that's being done on that brew. And that brew was made, we're told it was made from barley, mint, and water. But what grows on barley is Claviceps paspali, which is an LSD-like fungus. Love it. Ergot, which is soluble in water. There are ergots that are very dangerous, but there are ergot. Ergot is the class of fungus to which this belongs.
Okay.
And some of them are extremely dangerous. But this one is soluble in water, is not dangerous, and is basically LSD. They were drinking LSD in the Temple of Eleusis, and they were having revelations about the meaning of life, and they were creating great philosophy and brilliant ideas at the time. It's of course massively connected to this surge of intellectual activity in ancient Greece. But ayahuasca,
Or even before we get to ayahuasca, what were we discussing earlier? Is the pineal gland that you see represented in like as the pine cone? I saw
pine
when I was in the
cone, yeah.
Vatican.
There's one at the Vatican. They're pictured in many of the Mesopotamian reliefs that show the seven sages. They're holding a pine cone to somebody's head, you know.
Yeah.
There's a suggestion that the pineal gland, it has been suggested that the pineal gland secretes dimethyltryptamine. DMT. I think that the more recent work on that suggests it probably doesn't, but that it's a locus for endogenous. All of us have DMT in our bodies. We're all illegal here.
We're all carriers.
We're all carriers. It's a natural brain hormone.
Yeah.
The exact question of where in the body it's generated, some people think it might be the lungs these days. Wherever it is, it's there. Yeah. And the pineal is associated with it in a number of ways, and it's associated. The pineal is the third eye. It was an eye. The pineal was an eye. It still is in some amphibians.
That's why it's called the third eye.
It has a lens, a cornea, and a retina.
We've just evolved out of it.
Yeah, it's gone deeper into the brain. It's no longer light sensitive, but it's still arguably the third eye. So the connection of the pineal and DMT is not absolutely clear, but there is likely some connection.
Okay, so the idea of us looking for ourselves in the past, we're looking at how people build the pyramids, and we're going, well, we have these cranes. Where are your cranes?
Where are your cranes? Yeah.
Instead of looking for the things that we are not utilizing, that they may utilize, which are psychedelic drugs, and maybe that gave them access to. It's stupid to use the word powers because I think it kind of dismisses everything, but maybe they give them access to some sort of like otherworldly knowledge that could have helped them create.
Well, it's an interesting discussion, actually. Yeah. The interesting thing about psychedelics, one of the many interesting things about psychedelics is, for a start, new evidence that's emerging from scientific studies. At last, psychedelics have been taken out of the closet and are being examined for their therapeutic potential. And one of the things that it's very clear that psilocybin definitely does is
mushrooms.
Mushrooms,
yeah.
Which is closely related to DMT. It's a kind of orally edible, ingestible form of DMT. They promote neuroplasticity. They cause new neurons to grow in the brain. They make us smarter. Let us pay great tribute to Terence McKenna, a brilliant thinker in this field, whose stoned ape hypothesis and whose book, The Food of the Gods, was one of the early recognitions that psychedelics may have been the trigger that took our ancestor out of millions of years of boredom and put them on the path that we recognize as modern humanity.
Yeah.
It's a perfectly reasonable thing. Also, the way that psychedelics are very helpful with depression is very interesting. And why is that the case? Depression, and I speak from experience because I've suffered myself from a long period of depression back in the early 90s. Depression is a very narrow, rigid frame of mind where you get locked into recurring patterns of thought and they're very negative, and you keep on repeating them to yourself, and you start hating yourself, and you just can't bear anything, and you're locked, and you can't escape from it. And what psychedelics seem to do is that they break that pattern. They just break it completely. And in this case, for depression, what seems to work best is a massive dose rather than microdosing. Microdosing is great as well.
You have to snap yourself out of it.
You've got to snap yourself out of it.
There's also like, I think in depressive states, there's a narcissism wrapped into it.
Maybe so.
Not a narcissism in terms of like, I'm the best, look at me, everything's about me, but in the negative side of that.
It's all about you still.
Yeah. And that constant negative thought, but taking and having a psychedelic experience will make you realize maybe how small you are in the grand scheme of things, or how you are intertwined into the fabric of humanity, so it can break out of that. Yeah, I like
Ego
that.
death will disconnect you from the universe conspiring against you.
Exactly.
You're not that important.
And if you belong to a species that has been making the same kind of stone tool without any changes for more than 1 million years, two things are happening. Clearly, cultural information is being passed down, and clearly you're
Why can't they
locked
give
to
me
very
the
narrow
cool? Like,
front.
come on, I
And then
hate this
suddenly
game.
It changes, and our ancestors start producing this extraordinary cave art. This amazing cave art. Whether you're talking about that site Serrania de la Lindosa in Colombia, or whether you're talking about Lascaux Cave in France, the art is stunning, and it is classically psychedelic art. It is featuring geometry, patterns of swirling dots, zigzag lines. There's Serrania de la Lindosa, and there's one of the extinct Ice Age megafauna with the arrow pointing at it up there. The geometry that's in there, the swirling dots, the sort of interlinked chains that are shown out there on the left. These are all classic psychedelic visions. Very often, as people enter a deeply altered state of consciousness, it starts with geometry and patterns, and then it manifests more into entities. And those entities are often therianthropic in form. Greek therion, wild beast, anthropos, man. They're part human, part animal in form. Not something that you see every day, but something that is
very common in
frequently common, very common in Egyptian art, and very, very common
Alright, it's my last
in
round.
deeply altered states of consciousness brought
Thank
on
you for being here.
by psychedelics is the encounter with entities who then appear to communicate with us. And again, this is where the archaeologists roll their minds, because they like to think that consciousness is entirely local to the brain. It's all manufactured by the brain, and this is just our brain on drugs. Whereas in fact, the opposite seems to be true. The brain seems to be acting as a receiver for consciousness rather than as a manufacturer of consciousness.
And what does that mean?
Well, what it means is that we have to function in a very
last round of the night.
This world. We gotta know the laws of physics, even if we don't know them, as written down in scientific textbooks. We gotta know that if we bump into that wall, it's gonna hurt. We gotta understand all of that, and naturally, our main focus is on our physical survival in this physical realm. But what's useful for that is what is rightly called the alert, problem-solving state of consciousness. But there are many other states of consciousness that are available to us, and psychedelics unleash a completely different state of consciousness from the alert problem-solving state.
Alright, thank you for being here.
In that state of consciousness, we have these extraordinary experiences, and amongst those experiences, the most important are the encounters with entities that communicate with us. Now, we have a problem in trying to decide what is going on here. A very important project just underway at Imperial College in London, and another project that's going to be launched in Colorado, I think in Denver itself, within this year, where human volunteers, I hope to be one of them in Colorado. They turned me down in London because I've suffered from epilepsy since 2017. And there's no indication whatsoever that DMT would cause epilepsy, and I've smoked loads of DMT, and I know it doesn't cause epilepsy. But understandably, having gone through all the legal hoops to get permission, they don't want me dying in their lab. So they've not accepted me as a volunteer, but I'm hoping I might get accepted as a volunteer here in America. What it is extended release DMT, DMTX. DMT is normally
it's just going to keep you high?
Keep you high for an hour.
Instead of, what is DMT, like 5 minutes, 10 minutes?
And how long does it feel when you're high for 5 minutes, 10 minutes on DMT?
Oh, when you're in the DMT space, it can feel like forever.
So an hour is almost horrifying.
Does time not exist?
Well, yes, this is what many of the volunteers say, is that it's an alarming prospect to be in that space for an hour. They're being delivered it by drip constantly directly into their bloodstream. They can signal at any time, I've had enough, if they're really feeling overwhelmed. But by and large, most of the volunteers went through with it. I moderated a panel with four of the volunteers.
Anything interesting that they say
and a gentleman called Andrew Gallimore, who's invented the technology that's going to be used in Colorado.